What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Fresh Podcast, where we bring you everything fresh in entertainment. I'm your host, Drew Brumfield. Join with me, as always, is Robert. How you doing?
Where's everybody going? Bingo? Wait, no, that's Resident Evil. No!
Good job. Good job. Good job. You messed it up. And then Seth is with us again. How you doing, Seth?
Hello. I'm ready to go.
All right.
I just want to point out that my thing was intentional.
Yes. Okay. Well, before we get into the topic, I do want to say a special thanks. We recently released the first episode of a fresh look where I took a bit more of a deep dive into horror movies, and that video is doing super well on YouTube. You can go check it out. Our YouTube channel is in the description. But it's almost at 150 views, which is amazing. And thank you all for the support and comments and love. I just want to say thank you. You guys are amazing. That said, our topic today is not about horror movies. It is about video games. Specifically, I would say probably a safe assumption to say all our favorite games, or at least our favorite action game series, and that is Devil May Cry. Now, a lot of people might not know what Devil May Cry is, so give a quick little summary of it. DMC is an action game where the player is rewarded for doing, more stylish combos and, varying up your combo variety. In fact, there's even a meter in all the games where it shows you're doing really good or you're stylish or you're triple S ranks. So, and it has a bit more like a goofy and sillier moments, but still with having that sillier attitude can still have some really cool and just badass moments. So it's there aren't a lot of games in this series, but they're all for the most part really fun and super stylized and have a lot of character and attention to detail of them. Well, not all of them, but most of them anyway. We'll get to that. So before we get into it, just kind of a general question for you guys, because this isn't as a popular genre as a Mario or an Assassin's Creed or anything like that. So Robert, starting with you, how did you get into Devil May Cry?
So I was watching, I think it was an E3 video one year, and they had the trailer for Devil May Cry 5, and I was like, okay, this looks really cool, but what's Devil May Cry? So I kind of looked up some YouTube videos, was like, oh, that's kind of neat. So I ended up playing through them in order, as any sane person would do. I played 1, then 3, then 4, and then 5.
That is actually the
That
proper
was
order of DMC. Yeah, there is no.
Yeah, it was the perfect order to get into the
Yeah.
games. And as I played each one, I liked the next one more than the previous. I was like, okay, this is really cool. And then I get to 5, and it was like, holy crap, this is the best action game I've ever played.
Yeah, but bit of spoilers for what we'll talk about earlier, but yeah, get used to us singing Five's praises. But Seth, what about you? How did you get into the Devil May Cry series?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had dabbled a little bit in it. I remember DMC reboot coming to Game Pass one time. I tried it out there. I realized I just wasn't really into it. I was at a point where I played a lot of shooters mostly, so I didn't really touch much action games unless they were superhero related, like the Batman stuff. So I was like, yeah, I don't think DMC is for me. And then Devil May Cry 5 came out onto Game Pass, and I was like, I'll give it a shot. Why not? I'll give it a shot. And I fell in love with that game. I played through it, all the difficulties, S ranked everything, ran around, grabbed all the achievements, did the Bloody Palace stuff. Fell in love with that game so much. It was everything. It was the presentation. It was the combat. It was the music. It was the characters. Everything just clicked in that game with me. So I ultimately was kind of like Robert. I was like, dang, I need to check out these other games. So I ended up playing through DMC 1, DMC 3, and DMC 4 Special Edition. And I also found that I liked a lot of those games still for different reasons. I think a lot of them have varying strengths. But yeah, that's kind of where I got my start. I became obsessed with 5. That's where it all started for me.
Yeah, I feel like we all have so many stories. But I actually, originally for me, I was watching a YouTuber, Maximilian, and I was watching because I like fighting games. I like learning about them. Um, but he had a couple of his videos on there that were about this game series Devil May Cry. So I was like, what is this? I was looking up, and I like the style, I like the game for it, and I was like, this is really cool and like really interesting and unique. And then I saw the trailers for Devil May Cry 4, Devil May Cry 5, and I was like, okay, a lot of people are hyped for this. I'll try out. I think I did play. I think I played 3 because I looked it up and everyone was like 3 is the best one. So I tried 3 and I was like, that's really good. And then I did 4, and then and then obviously 5 came out, and like everyone else, that's why I'm like, okay, this is like amazing. This is one of my favorite games ever. I love this. And I'm gonna devote my life to this game for a little bit. So it was kind of like a passive, like, okay, this is a pretty cool series, and I'll keep checking it out. And then when I actually played 5, I just completely fell in love. But we'll talk about 5 in a little bit. We'll come back to that. There's a reason why I love 5. Let's start with the actual first Devil May Cry, which is DMC, Devil May Cry 1, the very first one, or just Devil May Cry. And so a little history about this game. Devil May Cry is a series made by Capcom, and Capcom also makes another series that more people have probably heard of called Resident Evil. At the time, they were making Resident Evil 4, and they were putting more like platforming and kind of different mechanics, and it ultimately just divulged into, we should just really make this a different type of game because all the characters were different. It had a bit more action focus like style to it, and it just didn't feel like Resident Evil, but they still liked the game that they were making. So
yeah, if I can interject for a second, I was watching a video on this earlier. It's Suno who was like the director for like Resident Evil, and he was letting Hideki Kamiya kind of experiment and prototype for what they wanted to do with Resident Evil 4, and it turned more actiony and less horror focused. But Itsuno really liked what Kamiya was going with for what was originally RE4. He's like, okay, this has like promise, you should make this its own game, and that's where it kind of evolved into Devil May Cry.
Yeah, exactly.
I think one thing I also want to interject is like, and granted, I could definitely be fact checked, but I think where the style of what would become Devil May Cry was, I think whether it was through glitch or something, they found a feature. It's like, oh, we can juggle enemies like in the air with attacks. I think that's where it started, and then it just went from there.
I don't know if that one. I would say I've never heard that one. I've heard that for Street Fighter. I know that's how the combo started in Street Fighter.
No, that it sounds kind of familiar to me.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not saying you're right or wrong. That's a Google question. We'll look that up later. But anyway, yeah, it kind of the moral of it is still it was kind of just this spawn of like we were doing something else and just kind of stumbled upon this really cool system, and then they built a game off of it. And DMC One, it is a good game, definitely in concept. But it does suffer through some problems. I mean, it's an older game and its age, at least in my opinion, it does kind of show, especially at any time you try to do a bit more of the platforming or a bit more of the trying to move around, because the camera
It's like a thing with a lot of like early like PS2 like games where it's like with Kingdom Hearts, they wanted to throw in platforming at points, and it just feels really awkward. And Devil May Cry's case really stiff because the jump doesn't really cover a lot of distance.
It messes up because the camera will keep switching and keep turning, because it works in a horror game where you don't, because it does that way, because you don't know what's around the next corner. So when the camera shifts, you're like, oh my god, like jump scare. But in a game where you're supposed to like be precise with your movement and stuff like that, an action game, it doesn't really blend that much. But so what are your thoughts on DMC One? Just kind of general things.
I think it's just like a really weird, like odd child. It was a prototype essentially of like what we would get later on with Devil May Cry. I really like it. I have a very big soft spot for Devil May Cry 1, just because I'm a big fan of Resident Evil. I actually did go back and play some of the older stuff, mostly Resident Evil 1, at least the HD version of that game. and I really like the fixed camera and the limited resources and stuff. And playing a Devil May Cry game where it still has this like you're in a haunted castle type deal. You have the fixed camera and like the aiming system and all that is very similar to Resident Evil. It clicked with me in a really weird way. Like it was like you're not quite Resident Evil and you're not quite what Devil May Cry would become. You're like this weird mix of these two genres, and I really like that in a weird way. I think there's something charming about it. It's definitely old now.
Yeah.
But I think there's something worth picking up there. I think it would make as a great like Halloween type game where it's not really scary, but it has like a sort of spook house vibe to it.
Yeah,
So
it's got the atmosphere down like towards like it's got that like Resident Evil horror type atmosphere, though it's not like it doesn't have like the same gameplay type as Resident Evil, obviously.
yeah, it doesn't have like the stronger horror elements to it, which is I think on purpose, and that's fine. I think it's neat. There is a part of me that wishes like, dang, I would like to see more games of this middle ground between Resident Evil and Devil May Cry. But yeah, that's about it.
It definitely does kind of. It's a weird. I kind of think it has a bit of a. It's not as bad as the next game in this series, but it has a bit of like an identity crisis where it doesn't fully commit to that action genre, but it doesn't fully commit to that like almost tank controls Resident Evil style. So it is this weird kind of just middle child if we don't really know what we want to do with this series, where we want to take these characters. So at least gameplay wise, it's a bit kind of structured.
I would
like interesting.
I am gonna have to push a bit against the identity crisis thing of like, oh, we didn't know what it wanted to be because there wasn't really anything like it quite at the time.
Yeah,
Right.
So like it's not so much an identity crisis, and it's more like this is extreme prototype.
fair enough.
There's nothing quite like it.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the first Devil May Cry?
So I have like an interesting like case because when I first played Devil May Cry 1 as my first DMC game, I thought it was good, but I thought it was very clunky and it felt like it aged a lot. Like I wasn't really clicking with it the first time. Um, but I did like a series replay in preparation for this podcast to kind of see where I kind of lied with DMC1, and I'm kind of lying more of like Seth, where I can appreciate the game a lot more. It's definitely not anywhere near as complicated or deep as something like even DMC3, but there's kind of like a beauty in the simplicity of it in a way. Like you can still do quite a bit with its like combat system. There's a lot of neat like stylish combos you can do. The style gauge is even like its own thing because in like the first couple Devil May Cry games, the style gauge more of is like how much damage are you doing in such a short amount of time as opposed to like varying up your moves, which is something I kind of found interesting. Because in the other games, it's like if you do the same combo over and over, your style gauge isn't going to go up anymore. But no, like the combat felt a lot better. The fixed camera angles didn't really bother me a whole lot. There were definitely some like tighter spots that I could feel. Yeah, that was a little rough, but came out enjoying the gameplay a lot more than I did the first time. I think some of the boss fights were a little too like gun reliant rather than
Oh
letting
yeah.
you use your melee combos. I think Griffin's like the worst offender of that,
The burger.
where like Griffin 2 and 3, where you're basically using like the grenade launcher just to kind of do pot shots because you can't really get in and like hit him with like a sword or Ifrit. Um, but other than that, a lot of like the enemies and the bosses were just really fun to fight. There's always little tricks to kind of make it like go faster. Like Nilo Angelo 2 just kind of melts with Ifrit if you do like the 13K combo, which it not only looks cool, it does a heck of a lot of damage in DT.
I want to clarify something, by the way, just again for people who like might not be familiar with the series. The reason he's saying like the name of the boss and then 1 or 2 is because in DMC, especially in these earlier games, there's a bit of a pattern where you fight a boss multiple times in a row. So
Oh yeah, that's what I should clarify. Is that
yeah,
there's not a lot
I
of
just wanted to make
bosses, but yeah,
there's really
there's a.
not that many bosses in the first one. I think I had the
I
number.
think there's like 4,
There's like 4 or 5,
but you
but
fight
you
you
fight
fight
them like
them multiple
Griffin,
times.
Shadow, Nightmare, Phantom, and Mundus,
what about
Angelo.
yeah, I
Angelo.
say
Yeah,
Neil
Shadow is a
Angelo.
boss.
So, but you fight each of these bosses multiple, like you'll beat them and then they'll leave and then you gotta fight them again and then you beat them and then you go fight them.
They'll have they'll be
Yeah.
a little stronger. They'll have some different moves to them. So your strategy that worked in the first fight may not work as well in the second fight.
So that's what he means when he says like Griffith 2 or Neo Angelo 3 or I don't actually remember the numbers you said, but anyway. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, but go ahead. Yeah, the combat you actually did enjoy and the
Yeah. And also like the atmosphere of 1, it has a lot of like varied locations in it for being like the first game, because you have like a castle section in the start, you got a little sewer section, you got a little like you get a coliseum, you get a little jungle, you get like a sunken ship with questionable swimming controls, but again, experimental game. Like they
Yeah.
tried a lot with it, and it's got a lot of variety for what they do have, and it's easier for me to kind of appreciate, especially after I played Resident Evil 4, and then went back to this game. I could definitely see some of the parallels better, because when I first played it, I never played a Resident Evil game, so I couldn't really see like the comparisons as much. But like all in all, in terms of like the gameplay and like the overall design, I think it's a lot better than what I originally like saw it as. And we didn't really cover the plot much, but
yeah,
to be fair,
that was the yeah, well,
most people.
that was the next thing I was gonna bring up is because story, and this is another thing that I guess I should have clarified in the intro with DMC. DMC, it's one of my favorite things actually about this, and it's one of my favorite things about video games is the number one thing that should be important in a video game, and this might sound like very obvious, but some people it isn't, is it should be gameplay and movement. Which like is this game feel good to play? Like are the controls good? Do buttons feel good to push? And DMC, despite being an old game, it does. What I mean, the story isn't bad necessarily, but it is a bit like it's campy. It feels a bit campy. But that is DMC style, and I kind of like it
Yeah,
more because it's that. It doesn't take
yeah,
itself
it's
super
it
seriously.
kind of it kind of borrowed a lot of that campiness from like Resident Evil,
Yeah.
because Resident Evil is not what I would call, like especially classic Resident Evil, a super serious like story. There's a lot of goofy moments in it, especially if you listen to the dialogue in the first Resident Evil game.
The dialogue in DMC 1 is perfect. In my notes, I literally just have the line, "I was the one that was supposed to fill your dark soul with light."
Man, you botched
Yeah.
that.
Which
You
if you
botched that
haven't,
so bad.
I'm not gonna scream that whole line, by the way, because I'm gonna blow out my audio equipment if I try to do it how he do it. I'm gonna mess up this recording if I do it. I've never met someone that could actually properly imitate how he does that line. That's almost impressive the way he does
It was a
It's so
a
bad.
very unique delivery. That's for dang sure.
If you haven't watched it, like I'm not gonna do the impersonation, but please just do yourself a favor. Just go on YouTube and just type in the sentence I just said. I was the one to fill your dark soul. It'll autofill it for the
Yeah,
rest of it. It's so funny. It's so funny that line. Um,
because
but
it's a funny thing about Dante,
yeah,
because Dante is a very cheesy character, but it's very charming.
it's so funny. I love it. But yeah, the introduction of I think Dante is a great fit for this one where he is a bit more he's silly, he's goofy, he's joking around. Um and he really, there's various degrees of that. Like there are some games he is more serious and some games he is more like joking silly Wahoo Pizza Man. But this one it's kind of I think it was a good like here's the character and like he's a good main character that where you're like I'm willing to like stick with him the rest of the way. If that makes sense.
Yeah, he's cool, but he's like cool in a really like kind of over the top way where it's just like you're not exactly cool, you're like a nerd's version of what cool is. So it's like a lot of the things you do is kind of like cheesy, but it's almost like he's kind of like a cheesy like action hero. Like it feels like with like one-liners that just like don't quite land and stuff like that. Obviously like a penchant for like over dramaticism, like the fill your dark soul with light crap.
Yeah.
Like it's very interesting. I will say though, I don't want to bag too much on the story of Devil May Cry 1 because like it's really interesting to play this game and feel like if you played like some of the later games, it's like, oh, these are all things that they touch on, like Dante's parents, and specifically his mom and his father Sparta, or the fact that like Virgil is heavily referenced in the first game in a way that I wasn't expecting. Because when I first heard that, like, oh yeah, spoilers, I suppose, that like Angelo was like Virgil, was Dante's brother Virgil. I was like, was that like a retcon or something like that? But if you play the game, it makes it pretty clear about that in a way. Like,
If you look in the
him,
credits, he's listed as Virgil. Like it doesn't say Nilo Angelo, it says Virgil.
I'm pretty
which
sure
is
he even
cool.
said that. Yeah, that.
He doesn't call him his brother in the game itself, but it's heavily implied with like his the fact that he has like the pendant and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I don't want to get into Virgil's character yet because there's you know which game I want to talk about Virgil. So we'll talk more about him and why he's important to this series. But yeah, remember that name. We'll bring back to him. So before we get on to the next game in the series, is there anything else you guys like wrote down or would to like bring up with DMC 1? I know we were a bit broad with this one, but
I'll go ahead and start with this.
yeah.
Do yourself a favor and do not play this game on Dante Must Die. Just play through it once on the normal difficulty and save yourself the headache. Dante Must Die difficulty is not really all that bad in my opinion until you get to the Mundus boss fight. It is ridiculous. He has like 3 phases. You have to do like a friggin' Starfighter Galaga section that is insanely difficult on the hardest difficulty. And then if you do get through it, the final fight against Mundus himself when he's in the lava pit and the lava's rising and he's shooting all these like projectiles at you and you're dying in one hit, it is annoying. I was a masochist for some reason, decided to play through on Dante Must Die, and I think I spent a good 4 hours on Mundus. It was stupid. Not to mention that you kind of need some items for the end of the fight. So if you used up certain items before then because of the limited resources in Devil May Cry 1, you are screwed on that final fight. So do not do Dante Must Die. It's a friggin' mistake.
These games are very famous for like they're almost designed to play through multiple times, but yeah, they hadn't quite gotten that formula of how to like balance the difficulty yet. I guess this was 2001 when this was made.
Yeah, and like
hard
I mean,
modes
like
in those games are hard.
yeah, and I think it's because like it's not like Devil May Cry now, where I would say it's like typical like Souls crap, tough but fair is the best way I could describe a lot of the difficulties now with Devil May Cry. But back then, no, absolutely not.
They didn't.
Oh,
They
I
didn't
got
care.
something when we get to 3.
They didn't care about if you cried or not. Okay, well, Robert, are you good with Devil May Cry 1?
I want to quickly bring up the music because a
Oh
lot the
yes,
battle
of course,
themes are very good.
yeah.
Like
Oh my god.
they're just some really good like rock pieces. They help accentuate the combat, make you feel even more like a badass than you already feel like from just slaughtering demons in the coolest way you can think of.
You want to talk about a
It's
game series that has a banger set? Almost all of these, even the worst games, have some really good soundtrack.
See, if there's one thing Devil May Cry can do pretty consistently is have good music.
Yeah. It's the type of music where it's like, even if you're not into like video games or stuff and you just like rock music, you just look up these soundtracks, especially when we get towards the later ones. The soundtracks on these are awesome. Almost every single game, even the ones we don't like, they know how to play music. So yeah, I very much agree with that. The music on these games are great.
It's the buttons have a lot of good weight to them.
Mhm.
I think I might have brought that up. I don't remember. But overall, it's a really good game. Definitely worth checking out at some point. Either as a first game or even if you visit it after playing later ones. It's just a good time. It's a good afternoon killer. It's only about 3-4 hours, even on the first playthrough.
Oh yeah, it's super short.
Yeah, I think I agree with you guys. But enough with singing that game's praises. Now let's go on to everyone's favorite game in the series, Devil May Cry 2, made in 2003. So this game,
Ugh.
this is definitely the black sheep of the series. It's kind of the one almost universally like agreed on as like this is everyone's least favorite. It was definitely a step down from the original, and I feel like Robert has a lot to say about this because he recently replayed it. So I'm gonna let you kind of go off. What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
DMC 2?
Yeah, I'll introduce this section as Robert played DMC 2, so you don't have to. It's not good. Uh, the end. No,
And now we're gonna go on to
it-
DMC. And now he's finished. No, I'm joking. We're not doing that.
no. So it had a lot of development hell going into 2. They weren't really sure what direction to take it. So it went through a multitude of directors until it finally I don't remember I think it might have was this Itsuno or it might have been someone else who took over 2 by the end to try and salvage something out of it.
I don't think we even know who the original director was, if I remember correctly. Like
Yeah,
I
they went
like
uncredited, like, they didn't want
Yeah,
to
yeah.
be
No,
associated with that game.
I just googled it. I technically it's. I think it. I don't know if this is right. It says Hideaki Tsusumu, but I don't know
It's
if that's
it's
accurate.
well,
Suno.
that's who ended up taking over though. Like what we're
Yeah,
saying is like the original director of this game.
yeah,
Like if you watch things like Spear Hunter has a great video kind of breaking down the history on this
Yeah.
game.
Also
The
also Matt McMuscles is what happened on Devil May Cry 2. Definitely check that out if you're kind of curious on it.
yeah,
So,
like
yeah. Well, I couldn't
but
find the
the
original
thing they
person.
kind of yeah, the thing that they kind of agree on is like there really isn't a record out there of whoever was the original director behind this because this thing was like it was definitely a rush job.
Yeah,
It's a disappointment because, like, the first game had so much promise to it. It was something new and fresh, but they didn't know where to take 2, and what we ended up with is a game that has a few new ideas. Some of them are interesting in theory, poor execution, and the game just feels very slippery to play. Like, getting into kind of the gameplay more than anything else, it doesn't feel anywhere near as tight as Devil May Cry 1. And that even goes with like the stinger animation where like in the first game, Stinger's a move where Dante takes his sword and like thrusts it forward while dashing at an enemy, and it looks cool in 1. In 2, that move, it's like he's tripping over his sword because it's too heavy and he can't like thrust it properly. Like, it feels weak, and they changed up how the combos work. So like in the first game, to kind of vary up your combos, you change what timing you press like the triangle button or Y button depending on what platform you're on. Um to kind of vary up like different moves. But 2 kind of changes it to where it's based off of stick direction, and it's very like weak combos. But there's one thing that makes 2 more bearable, and it makes it very boring in turn, is the guns.
yeah.
The guns are stupid overpowered. You can pretty much play the game by holding down or mashing like the square button. I played this on PlayStation, by the way. Um, but yeah, the game just if you want to get through it faster, just press the square button. It does more damage than a sword combo, and it's not super fun.
Another like
Um,
issue with 2, and it goes along with like the whole shooting thing, is a lot of the enemy like designs are just, especially the bosses, are just not that good. I mean, I'm pretty sure
oh man,
a couple of the enemies are just infused tank and infused helicopter, and just
yes,
really boring
yes.
enemies.
Uninspired, like
Two boss
really,
fights are
Yeah,
tanks and helicopters,
and that's just,
and they are so boring.
and
yeah,
there's
like I
even
think
like they, you can't
uninspired
even hit
is
them
like
with
an
the sword.
understatement with
Yeah.
this. Yeah, I think uninspired is like an understatement with this game. When it comes to enemy design, it's weird because like maybe I sort of forgot to mention like DMC one had pretty good enemy designs. Like they were fun and expressive. Like you had like the bloody puppeteers, the bosses like Griffin, and even though I have my beef with him, Mundus was a really cool and weird design of like a stone angel mixed with an eldritch abomination versus like yeah, infested helicopter or
Yeah.
tank, and it just everything looks like a giant mosaic of garbage textures.
Oh man, yeah, everything blends together. Look up the DMC2 room. It's a portion of a level. It looks awful. It's pretty infamous.
I'm also,
It's ugly.
also, this might just be me, and it might just be the art style, but it looks like visually worse than
It
one,
It
and
does.
one
It
came out two
it
years
goes.
earlier.
It takes a lot of browns and dark reds and blends them all together. Get some grays in there too. Half the time you can't even see the enemy's health bar because the color of the health bar blends in with the background of the level. So you just can't, you have to like squint to see like, oh yeah, there's like a very subtle difference between the health bar's dark red and the background's dark red.
Yeah, there's a lot that's not good with this game.
Yeah. The level
And that's, oh yeah, well, go ahead. Yeah, level design. I was
level
gonna,
design,
that was gonna be next.
very awful. It's never clear where to go. They don't even do subtle things that the first game does when you might get lost because the first game there might be like some light sources to kind of go, hey, you should look here, and 2 doesn't always do that. So you can be wandering around for a while because you missed like a tiny portion of a wall that was dark and blends in with everything else, and you're like, oh, I didn't know I could interact with this.
Hmm.
It's super easy to get lost into.
Yeah,
The levels aren't all super long, at least, but they're not laid out in a very like straightforward way.
the one. This is also the only game where, yeah, this is the only like of the DMC games where there is little to no reference to like to Virgil, Dante's brother, or like a lot of the other characters that will be introduced later, or that were introduced in one. Like it really does kind of like almost all these characters are new, and
And they
none of
don't
them are
matter.
super interesting because I'm looking at
I
the cast list and I'm like, I forget who these people were.
look, I'm
Um,
going to be honest with you. I played the game in one sitting and then okay, 2 sittings actually in an afternoon, like 3 4 hours, and I couldn't tell you what the hell goes on in that game.
yeah, yeah,
It's
so
so
it's difficult.
forgettable. It's so meaningless.
The one I will say, the one thing, I guess technically two, because I like the soundtrack, but the in reality, the one thing that I actually like about the game, I like Dante's design. I like his outfit. I think he looks cool. Other than that,
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the only good thing coming out of 2 is Dante's design.
yes.
And that's the version of Dante that they use in Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne.
the yeah, like I was about to say that too with like Drew. I completely agree. I really like the sort of I'm not sure if it's armored, but like at least looking at the images of it, like it looks like a more like black front to his red long coat. Like I really like a blacker chest area. It looks neat, and plus the propped up collar, it does look cool. If they wanted to make Dante look more like a badass with his outfit, I think they succeeded with DMC2's design. It's
There,
a shame about everything else about the
yeah.
game,
There,
especially since like apparently Dante's a little bit more emo this time around as well.
He's very
yeah.
emo. He doesn't talk much. He decides things by flipping a coin, which is never explained. He
Well,
just
no,
does it.
well, there's no, that actually is explained.
It is.
I will give it this credit because at the end of the game, it's revealed that it's a double-sided coin. So he's not actually leaving it to chance. He's just letting the people he talks like it's a joke because
It's not a joke.
it's not. It's a bad joke. It's still
He
a
plays
joke.
it fucking serious.
Yeah, well, because like the whole idea is like, oh, well, I do the good thing or I be an asshole. Oh, well, I'll flip it to a coin. Oh, I did the good thing. But in reality, like
He
at the end of
always
the
does
game,
the good thing.
well, yeah, at the end of the game, like the girl he gives it to is like, oh, it's a double-sided coin. He always was going to do the good thing. Like he always was gonna take the job, and he always was gonna go into hell riding a motorcycle. Like, so I will say they do at least like kind of explain. Like it's not a good joke, but they do explain it. There's a reason.
I don't know, man. I can't see it as a joke.
I think that
Yeah,
might be
I think
Tim's humor.
whether
I'm
it was a
pretty sure.
joke was it debatable. I think it's to me it sounds more like they were trying to add a layer to his character to make him a little bit more edgy but still kind of a hero, and it's like I don't know. It still doesn't feel fitting with Dante. Not that he can't be a hero or something like that. It's just that like Dante, like, you know, he's just a goofball. He seems to love his job. Like, you know, his job is just kicking the asses of demons. It's like that's who he is. So I don't, and like having a good time and not really like being kind of nonchalant about it. So he's still flipping a coin and looking dead serious about it. It's like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that was a joke. I think that was just something they put in to try to make him more edgy.
Probably.
Yeah.
I will say, I think I'll say this. I have a slight theory onto why he acts this way. I think it's more like a theory that was made to like kind of justify this, because he's very different from the other characters. And I'll bring it back up when like we get to either 4 or 5 onto why his character is so different. But yeah, if this character didn't dress the way he did and have like the sword and the guns, like he would not be recognized as Dante. He's not as there's like kind of like a fan theory on the why, but I'll get into that later. I don't want to waste it here on two. Which
Yeah, so for a spoiler-free version is something that happens in the events of 1. Really probably got to him after that, and I guess he went into an emo phase from it.
yeah, again, I'll go into detail of that in a sec, but I think that's enough about 2. Let's go on to
Yeah, I can't think of anything else I can really bitch about 2 that hasn't already been said.
if we skipped it, just assume it's bad. Like honestly,
Yeah,
there's a
it's
reason we always like people always kind of say like the correct order to play this game is 1, 3, 4, 5.
yeah,
I understand
nothing.
that there are 2 games on the list I did not say, but that is how you play these games. You play 1, 3, 4,
Yeah.
5.
Because nothing in 2 really matters at the end of the day. Like, it's never really referenced in the later games.
Yeah,
So none of the new characters in 2 have ever shown back up in the later games. So yeah, just poor gameplay, bad bosses that half of them turn into you have to use the gun because you can't touch them with anything else but the gun.
yeah,
All the weapons are just swords with the exact same combos. Like some might do more damage than others, but the only other interesting idea is when you're really low on health, you do a different type of devil trigger that's kind of like uh basically a sort of comeback mechanic in a way where you just throw like a lot of like fireballs and stuff that do a lot more damage than like your standard like overdrive gun, machine gun, pistol, whatever thing. That's the only other like interesting idea, but honestly, it just breaks the game even further.
yeah. It just doesn't feel
It's half baked.
yeah.
A lot of things in 2 where they're half baked or they don't matter. So yeah, that's the end of 2.
Yeah.
I've
So
said my piece. Drop the mic. I'm out.
let's.
I think the best that you could summarize with like 2 is like we did talk about that. Like there's kind of 2 games in this franchise that people kind of look upon pretty poorly. I at least with the other game, I do see some people defending it online. I see
Yeah.
no one defending this game.
No,
There is
DMC
no
almost
defending
everyone
2.
has agreed. I've never met anyone that like, other than Dante's design, ever said anything positive about. But I think that's enough. I think people get the idea that 2 is that good. And if we forgot to talk about something, just assume we don't like it. Like that's probably
Yeah.
a good assumption. But now let's talk about a game that we do like. I would assume that you guys like this one, which is Devil May Cry 3. And Devil May Cry 3 kind of it saw what was happening with 2 and was like, okay, we didn't like this direction. This was a bad move, pretty clear. And they didn't reboot it, but they decided to go backwards. In chronological order, Devil May Cry 3 is technically the first game in sense of like this is Dante's first time like opening up his like mercenary shop and doing all this and opening up. And Devil May Cry 3, I think, is where a lot of people. This is where a lot of hardcore fans like see it as like their first real Devil May Cry series. Like 1 had a lot of really good ideas, and 3 is where they're like, okay, let's refine it, let's do it right, and like let's just really hone in on this, and it really shows.
Yeah, it's 3 is where like 3 is basically the birthplace of what the current identity of Devil May Cry is.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. And this is the one where I did want to talk about. And I'll start with him just because we've referenced Virgil so many times. This is where it's not his first introduction. You know, he was New Angelo in 1, but this is where you see his real form as Dante's twin brother. And Virgil is essentially your counter to Dante. Dante's silly and goofy. Virgil's very serious in tone. And they have just such a fun, back and forth between each other. These two characters work really well, and I think part of that also has to do with the fact that this is the first time Dante is voiced by Ruben Langdon, and he'll voice Dante for well, I forgot the reboots in here, but through the rest of the mainline series, and like he's who a lot of people associate with Dante. And why did I didn't see who voiced Virgil, and then
Dan
Dan
Southworth.
Southworth. I was getting there. He will voice Virgil like from now on, and those two have such a good chemistry between like the voice acting. They're really fun back and forth, and the fights between you and Virgil are arguably the best in the entire series, just because Virgil is designed as another playable character. In fact, you even play as Virgil in
the
3.
special edition.
Yeah, in the special edition of 3. But it's very clear that it's like he is supposed to be your counter. He is supposed to be a similar match to you. So it feels rewarding when you fight him because it feels like it's not the sense where it's like you're fighting yourself like you're in a carbon copy. He's different. He has different moves, but there's still some similarity. His stinger is a multi-slash, yours is a 1. His fist moves are kind of different from yours. He has different weapons, but it feels very like an even match. And I think having Virgil in this game kind of makes DMC DMC. Like these two characters together are really what like makes this game great. The fact that like you have a counter now. You have someone as like your rival. So I think that's really what kind of sells DMC3 on top of, improved gameplay, improved visuals, and improved bosses. Seth, what are your kind of, general thoughts about DMC? I'll get more specific, or DMC3. I'll get more specific after the fact. But...
Yeah. I would probably say the best way I could like sum up what DMC3 is one of the opening scenes where it is Dante chilling out at his place. Terran Negru rises up the tower, and a bunch of like demons break into his place, stabs him. He still gets his pizza, punches a jukebox, and just beats the shit out of all of them.
Yeah.
While the like music is playing. And I want to add something. This scene was mocapped by Ruben Langdon because Ruben Langdon's background is actually in stunt work. So he is Dante in every sense of the word. He does the mocap for him as well as the voice acting. So I think that's what basically sets this game apart from so many others. It's just like it has taken all the wacky elements and the action and the badassery and just cranking it up to 11 here. And this is where DMC finds its identity. And going into Virgil as well, I would say that what makes Virgil work is he is a definitive skill check against the player. Um, like it's almost infamous now, but like when you start this game, I don't believe you have easy mode selectable at the start.
Oh yeah,
So it is
forgot about that.
yeah. Yeah, so it is just a normal mode. What's infamous is whenever you do get to the first Virgil fight and he just absolutely creams you because he will. He will do it the first time to every player. I don't care who you are. It you will die so much, you will get a message that says easy mode is now selectable.
I got that from
Um,
Cerberus. Like the
yeah,
first boss. The first
Yeah.
boss is even like pretty brutal for a first time.
I
that is true. That is true.
But I like what Sub is
Uh,
getting at, where it's like, I don't know, when they have that message like easy mode's now available because Virgil's kicked your butt so many times,
Yeah.
that's almost like it like lights a fire under you of just like, no, I'm not putting on easy mode. I'm gonna beat this thing. At least for me, and maybe for some other players, but it's just like, no, it like kind of like upsets me, it pisses me off. Like, no, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna get better at this game.
This is a personal challenge now.
Yeah, no, this is
and
petty. I don't even want the achievement. I don't want the gamer score. Sorry.
and I think it's that and I think that's what makes Virgil so memorable for so many people is that he is such a challenge, but like once you understand his move set and such, he's there are like ways to counter him. There is ways to like when you anticipate certain moves he does, there is things that Dante has that he could use against them. And I think each time you fight him, the fight gets more intense. It gets more aggressive, and it forces the player to become an even better Dante to defeat Virgil. And I really like that. I think I love the way that they use Virgil here. It would be to me, it kind of kickstarts a lot of even more tropes of like your sort of rival that skill checks you. Like I would say in other action games, like Jean from Bayonetta 1, Jetstream Sam from Metal Gear Rising, Revengeance. Like that's what I think of. I would even say like in Sekiro, your first fight against Genichiro Ashina. Um, that's what I think of a lot.
Because like the cool thing about Virgil is that he's the first boss that really makes you slow down and learn the patterns as much. Because all the other bosses are ones that kind of tower over you, and you can kind of get away with just kind of spamming attacks over and over. Um, but with Virgil, he will hit and counter you if you go too like sword crazy. Like he makes you learn him before you can defeat him.
Yeah. It's a that rivalry really does make that game, and it makes that game really well. I do want to like point out that like Virgil is not the only boss. He's good and he's the best part of this game, but all the other bosses in this game, and especially the weapons you get from the bosses, because every time you defeat a boss, for the last time you gain their weapon, they're all super fun as well, and they're really enjoyable. Some of the most fun weapons in DMC is like the dual katanas with the different elements.
Blagny Rudra.
Yes, exactly. I'm not gonna remember their names.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say the Cerberus weapons, which come back in DMC 5.
Um, there's a couple that I would say for the most part the boss fights are good. There's a couple that are a couple of stinkers. In my opinion, I really didn't care for the Elder Garyon fight. In my opinion,
Garyon can be a little annoying. Arkham 2, the second Arkham fight.
Yeah. Fair.
Oh God, yeah. Well, not the actual final fight, but one of the final fights. Yeah, the Arkham is it's rough. It's real rough.
Yeah, fair.
So it's like, yeah, it's like we kind of went on a lot about the bosses, but I kind of want to back up to kind of when Devil May Cry 3 first came out on in the West.
Yeah.
It was hard.
Mhm.
It was a very, very challenging game. The normal difficulty in that version is what hard mode is in Special Edition, which came out a year later, which toned down the difficulty quite a bit, and then that's where it added the playable Virgil. Because this even like on Special Edition it is still a very punishing game, but what it does is it brings back like the tight like combat that the first game had. Like everything has good weight to it. Everything just feels good to use. And what were we gonna say?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but also like a special edition. That's when they did like the whole like yellow orb versus golden orb mode, like kind of how
Yes.
sort of like your life system is sort of altered too.
Yes. I think Gold Orb is where if you use it, you'll respawn where you are, but if it's yellow, you have to restart the mission. I want to
Yeah,
say.
Yeah.
yeah, I think that sounds right. It was there was definitely I can't remember which one is which because it's been a bit, but I do remember one of the orb modes is I think it was yellow orb mode is a more challenging lives mode than the golden orb one.
It's definitely, yeah. I forget, yeah. 3 is where they didn't care too much. Correct. Just to also clarify something, like special edition versus regular was because I only played special edition. That's why like that's the only version
Yeah.
that I think of.
Mm,
Was in the red.
it's the only version most people played
Yeah,
because the original was just PS2. Every like all the HD re-releases were the special edition.
which was the mode where you actually get to like you and Virgil fight together and like you can even control him a little bit. Was that always in the original one, or was that an inclusion in special edition?
I think it was special edition.
That
Are you
was.
thinking of Bloody Palace too?
I know in Bloody
Because
Palace
the this is actually okay. We're kind of jumbled here, but something
Yeah.
kind of going off of that is the Bloody Palace mode, which fun fact actually was introduced in two, but special edition added that back, and in the Switch version, which is the version I played, you can do local co-op to where you can have a friend join you and play as Virgil, and you just do co-op combos,
That's not
which
even
is
what I was talking
insane.
about, but yes, that is a good.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, I was
yeah.
talking. I'm pretty like there's a mission where like you and Virgil are fighting the same like in the
Oh,
main
that's
story.
that's Arkham too.
Yeah, in Arc. Yeah,
Yeah,
Arkham
That's
that's
City.
Arkham
that's
Knight.
for the end of the game. Yeah, I don't know if that's in the original cut. I assume it was because it feels like it plays like it was, but who knows? It may have not been.
Yeah, it might have just been like he just went off on his own. But yeah. Anyway, yeah, special edition was like it added so many like improvement, and that is definitely the like if you're getting into this game, definitely do special edition. I don't even know where you could find an original version. But it's
If
You got a PS2, and you can find the original
if
PS2 copy. That's
yeah,
one way.
yeah,
if I
exactly.
can add a
But
layer
honestly,
onto
yeah,
playing
this the
if
special
I can add
edition.
a layer onto playing the
Yeah,
special edition, try the Switch version. The Switch version adds freestyle, which this is something introduced in the later games. As Dante, he has four styles. It
mhm.
is Trickster, Gunslinger, Swordmaster, and Royal Guard, which each kind of have you play the game in a different style. But in the Switch version, you could choose freestyle, which lets you press a direction on the D-pad and you switch different styles. Because in the original releases of DMC3, even Special Edition, Dante can only hold two weapons and two guns on him, and also one style. But Freestyle unlocks all that, so you have every style and every weapon at your disposal at all times, which it makes combat even crazier because there's so much you can do with that.
Yeah, the style system, which is another good thing that we should talk about, and it's one of the things that like this game makes the gameplay of this game also just really fun. The fact that Dante has essentially his moveset like just expanded so much with the style system. Um and it adds so much like variety to your combos, and it also adds something that wasn't lacking in the other ones, but like just expanded where it's like I play the game and like the way I play the game is now super different than the way like Robert or Seth will play the game, because maybe I favor like sword style, or maybe I favor trickster style, like dodging around, versus another player which will I want to royal guard and perfect parry every single enemy and then just like blow them up with royal guard, or I just want to pretend I'm playing DMC2 again and stand in like the far back corner and just be in gunslinger. That's not all gunslinger does, but still, you get the idea. It adds player customization, and like players can now play it very differently and add essentially their own style to the game and feel like they are a bit more in control of it. And yeah, especially with the Switch version where you could just switch them on the fly, it adds a lot more like variety and like customization to that game. It just makes the gameplay a lot better. So yeah, I love the style system. I think it fits very well with the whole
Yeah.
System and the combo meter or the
The,
style
the
tree.
style system, the style changing and stuff pretty much just is Dante's character from this point on.
Yeah.
Like that's what sets him apart from the later games with different playable characters. Well, even like Virgil and 3, he only has one style. But Dante has like 6, 4 at the start, 2 you unlock later through the game, styles that you can like switch between.
Yeah, but it's just
Plus, also like there's some like really neat styles that are just exclusive to just DMC3 that doesn't really ever come up again. Like Quicksilver and Doppelganger are the two I can think of off the top of my head, which are really cool styles. And it's a little sad that they don't come back, but I kind of understand why. They're a little ridiculous.
I'm pretty sure those are the exact two because in future games he only has 4. In this game he has 3, so I think those are the exact 2 that like he doesn't have.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely that's why I think that's also a reason like 3 is, and we'll get into like our personal rankings like at the end, but there is still like a large group of people that still consider 3 their favorite because it revamped the series. It has a brand new story. It's the introduction of like what a lot of people have the visual for these characters. Uh and it just kind of like made the gameplay a lot of fun. So I feel like a lot of people have very like good memories of DMC3. And there's no, there's still like a pretty good argument for this one to be people's favorite. Um until we
Because
talk about
you
5.
briefly mentioned
But
this, you briefly mentioned the story. 3's the first game in this series that has like that puts the story more in the forefront, and it does a damn good job with it.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
It's a very small cast of characters. There's only about 4 characters in the game, but they're all very deep and fleshed out to where it feels like it's more grandiose than it actually is.
hmm
Because you got the 2 brothers Dante and Virgil, and then we mentioned Arkham,
yeah,
and there's another playable, not playable. There's another character called Lady. Um, this is her introduction in the series, and she has a lot of depth to her character and has as much arcs as Dante and Virgil do, even if she isn't like a playable character.
yeah. Lady is also the final. This is another just a like side note. This isn't too big, but like in the first 3 DMC games, all 3 of like the female leads that is like paired with Dante, all 3 of them betray him at one point. Lady is just the last one because after this they stop doing that for me. But I also, in my opinion, Trish is nice. She's the one introduced in DMC1, but I think Lady's probably my favorite. She is the most unique and has the most character out of all of them.
Yeah, I think out of the
Yeah,
female protagonists in the DMC series, Lady is my favorite.
yeah, because like she actually has like a full on story that like um that feels like it can exist on its own outside of Dante, but does coincides with Dante's own struggle with like his family as well. Like that's kind of like ladies, like that's there are similarities of like their narratives, and I really like that they have like that parallel of like we are both dealing with like family members that are essentially trying to kill us. Um, uh, and I really like that. I think DMC3. I will go ahead and say it here. I think DMC3 probably has the best narrative out of all the Devil May Cry games. I
Yeah,
think it's
that's
tight,
what I thought.
it's concise, and as you said, the characters are really well developed. um I think that this is like the best balance of like having cutscenes and like taking some of the control away from the players to tell a story and doing it in a really effective way while still also being badass and over the top, where you can still have these really good heart to heart moments between Dante and Lady, like kind of like sort of bonding over the shared trauma of their families. And then you can still also have a scene of Dante driving down Terra Negru on a motorcycle and getting eaten by a giant leviathan. Like it's the perfect balance, I think.
Everything just fits. Everything just it all has the style and like this unique like atmosphere where those two worlds, yeah, that totally makes sense. And I wouldn't be surprised like if those scenes happened right next to each other. So yeah, there's a lot of DMC was like DMC 3 really revamped the series and really brought a lot of people back and just like, no, we know what we're doing now. We have a vision, and it's the reason that like I think there are so many fans of DMC is this one is really what like kind of grew it the franchise's audience.
Oh yeah.
So before
I think
go ahead.
I do think that as much praise as I want to heap onto DMC3, because I do agree it is a very, very good game. I do have some gripes with it.
Yeah.
It does have some of the most annoying level design and enemies in the series for me personally. This is more of like a personal take than anything. But like, all right, I'm not gonna lie. I got lost so much in Terra Negru. I would run in circles trying to figure out where the hell am I supposed to go. I'm not really sure why. It just didn't really feel like it was very clearly communicated to me of like, okay, have I been through this door before? Have I been in this hallway before? Which stairs am I climbing? Where am I going? It was very confusing to navigate. I can tell because like the mission times at the end of this thing for me would be like 30 or so minutes of me being freaking lost. And I didn't have that issues with like some of the other Devil May Cry games. So it felt very easy to get lost in the tower. I think some of the puzzle sections were a little bit more annoying than fun, to be honest. And the enemy types, there's one enemy, like some of them are not great, like the statue ones that just like, sort of hop around and stuff like that, and they grow wings. I don't care for them. But the one enemy type that really annoyed me the most was that I call them the Angel. I'm not really sure if that's what they're actually called, but they're these dudes that just can become intangible and phase through walls. And there's a lot of times I'm just waiting for them to come out, and like 50% of my attacks may hit them. They are the most annoying part of the game for me personally. I hated those fights.
There are similar like demon designs to that enemy you just described, and they stay through the rest of the series, and I don't know why. They get better. They're not as annoying in 3, but for some reason they're like this untangible like monster is what stuck around out of all the enemy design. Another one that like really frustrated me was, and I don't think you mentioned them, but if you did, I'm sorry. Is the shield enemies that have like the spiked or like essentially saw blade shield, and like they'll start backing away from you because you can only hit them from the back. And there were so many times like mid fight, they just put their back in a corner, so I can't hit them. So I just have to literally wait for them to move forward closer to me, and then I can get behind them. That was the most frustrating thing for me. That I'm just like, they're not even hard. I just have to literally just wait and just be like, okay, come on, get out of the corner. I want like my style meter is going down. What are we doing here?
Especially since like some of the S ranks are tied to how quickly you complete like the level is also frustrating. It's like there is like maybe one too many enemies where you are playing a waiting game with them. I agree, and it's like, oh god, I just want to fight you. Like, stop running away from me. But just fight.
Yeah, I will agree. There are some not every enemy is designed perfectly, but I still think ultimately like the flaws in DMC are very much overshadowed by its positive. Robert, I forgot to even ask it. What were some of the negatives that you had about 3?
I definitely agree with Seth. The level design definitely got kind of like, confusing towards like the end of the game, because there would be points where I would be like completely lost, and my mission time would be like 30 minutes when it should be like half of that.
Yeah.
Just because it wasn't too clear where to go. Because a lot of the game, it has a gray like art style. Like I harped on DMC2 for being like a lot of dark red and like brown. DMC3 goes with a lot of gray. There's some areas that stand out more than others, but when things kind of have the same color scheme, it kind of makes it harder to make things stand out. So the level design definitely kind of took a hit in that department. Um, I think just the last act of the game was just very like even more of a difficulty spike in some of the worst ways because that's when a lot of like the angel and shield enemies really like pop up. Um, some of like the in-game boss fights, like I mentioned Arkham 2, where a lot of it is just you fight ads waiting on the main boss to come back so you can fight that one. And that's right after no, that's in the same mission as a boss rush where you have to like beat certain bosses to open a door and it's not entirely clear which bosses you have to fight at first. So you only have to do 3 bosses to get out of that boss rush, but you don't always know which ones you have to do. So you could take forever refighting bosses and dying to them again over and over try to get to like the the last boss of that level and it just drags on.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah,
shame because that's a level that I really want to like. Like I typically like boss rush levels, but it comes down to like you have to make those fun and have good pacing. And I don't think DMC3 had good pacing with that level.
it's like as much as like the core combat is really fun, the I like the first half of the game more than like the second half.
Yeah. It definitely
Absolutely agree with that.
its opening act definitely does like carry it really hard. I think that's
Yeah.
a lot of people get lost in that.
It's
Like
like for as much as like there's a lot of fun things like Dante playing of his new weapons after he beats the boss and gets a new one. Those are always really fun to watch. And then right after that you go into fighting enemies that just are not that fun to fight. Their tells aren't always that obvious and they could just, you know, trip you up and you just eat a lot of damage very quickly. It's like for as much like good things as there are in 3, there can be just as much bad things.
yeah.
Um Though I want to just bring up one last good thing about 3 for me is that I think it has probably one of my favorite soundtracks in the series. It's one that's really grown on me, and like Dante's main theme, "Devils Never Cry," is one of my favorite tracks in like the DMC series.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, one of the best credit sequences in the series for sure
Oh.
on this one.
Um. I mean, yeah. I can't disagree. Like the soundtrack's amazing. I haven't. It's not my favorite, but a lot of my favorites in this series are coming later. But I don't want to get into that right now. What I will get into right now, assuming that is all your guys' points in 3, that's all I had for it. Is the next game in the series DMC4, and DMC4 it starts to kind of take a different approach to it, not necessarily like bad, but more just different. It doesn't open with Dante. It introduces a new main character, that of Nero. We find out more about Nero's backstory and how he's connected to this family later. But it starts out with Nero, this new character, and you're essentially chasing Dante, and you have to figure out, why he attacked your home and all this. And that is kind of like the main pitch of 4 is not only you do play as Dante at the end, but you're also playing as this new character. And I feel like a lot of the game kind of banks off people liking this new character, and I think for the most part, I do. I really like Nero. I like how he is different from Dante and Virgil. And he plays super differently. Um, and I even like the gameplay of 4, but my biggest issue with DMC4, and Seth has brought it up a couple times, but I think 4 is the one where I really, really dislike the level design for the main
So
reason of you play through that game. A full playthrough of that game is you play through, going straight as Nero and then playing through it a second time going backwards as Dante. Like you play through the level going backwards, and that was so boring. The fact that you had to play
yeah,
the game twice, once forward, once backwards, and it's not like it's not like playing through the level backwards makes it any different. It's just the same level, but you're just doing it in a different order, and it's very frustrating to get through.
Yeah, so I guess to kind of back up once again, DMC4 had a kind of weird development cycle, and they were wanting to try something new with a brand new character, which is where they came up with Nero. They specifically designed him to be like designed similar as Dante, but he has a different fighting style than Dante. Um, because they wanted to do like a kind of different story with a lot of it, but the game was kind of rushed towards the end, so they couldn't fully finish like the story of just of Nero. So they're like, okay, we still have Dante. We'll put him in the story and kind of make him more of the focus for a while. Kind of like, hey, let's clean up Dante's style. That's where they add the style switching kind of gameplay to Dante, um, because they couldn't fully get the game of Nero done. Because originally, I think the main character was just going to be Nero. Because they wanted to have like a brand new person for this. Because they're like, okay, we've had 3 games of Dante. Let's try something new.
I honestly feel that, yeah. Like it like this is even the story itself feels so focused on Nero. I will say this game has a really cool intro. I think
Yeah.
Dante just breaking into a church and executing the Pope is pretty badass. So
I think it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Such
The
a
intro of the game is Nero was trying to rush into a church to see his girlfriend perform like basically like a recital or something, and he barely makes it. He gets in, and then she finishes her song. The Pope goes up and starts talking, and then Dante comes crashing through the ceiling. It just shoots him in the head.
And then roll credits.
it's awesome, and you start off the game with granted it's more of a tutorial than a real boss fight, but you start off the game fighting Dante, which is very fun. And like the cutscene, in my opinion, is really fun because like even though Dante's more of a side character here, he's still just a cheeky little bastard the whole time.
No, he completely toys with you in the
Yeah.
tutorial. It not only teaches you how to play, it has Dante just tease you the whole time or just be a dickhead. He doesn't even fight you, really. Like, yeah, he'll shoot at you a couple times, but he doesn't even like pull out his sword.
It's very.
That is true.
It is one of. This is in this game very similar to 3. Has a fantastic opening sequence. It's super fun. It's super memorable. It establishes like this character dynamic between like super cocky asshole uncle. I shouldn't have just said that, but super like
I mean,
cocky asshole.
he's
Like
got the uncle vibe
he
to
is an
him.
uncle. No, he is like drunk. He is drunk. He is drunk uncle that just like pushes you around and messes you. And then like this little. I mean, he's not a kid, but like he's acting like a kid, trying to beat him and trying to show he's better, but also just trying to like gain this guy's approval of just like I want to be on your level. I want to show you, and you get that character dynamic like so fast. That's why I really like Nero, and I think he's such a great addition to this cast of characters.
He's got the cockiness like Dante has,
Yeah,
but
He's a
he's a
little bit more
lot.
serious.
He's more serious about it, and he's clearly a lot less experienced than Dante.
yeah. I also
I
think.
do.
Oh, go ahead.
One of my favorite like scenes in that opening section is that just really illustrates it to me. Is it's yeah, like Nero's whole thing is he has like a demon arm. Is that Nero kind of reveals his demon arm, punches Dante as hard as he could. Dante goes flying into a bunch of like church pews. And then he just stops himself with a sword, sits back down, and just grins back at Nero. It's like, is that all you really got? It's
Yeah,
like freaking hilarious to me. Like I said, Dante's just such a cheeky little bastard, and I love it.
it's it's really fun. That opening. I remember when I first played the game. I played that opening scene. I was like, I'm excited for this game. I am excited. I am ready to go. I also just talking like other than story. I love gameplay. Like Nero is he's different and he's also really fun. I love the exhaust mechanic. So essentially, the way it works is Nero's sword is a sword, but then also essentially a motorcycle because you have to rev it up to charge it, and it gives you more powerful attacks. But if you have proper timing when you swing and essentially rev it as you're hitting people, then you will get more exceed, more powerful attacks, and it's a really like skill cap type mechanic, and it's really fun and really flashy when you do pull it off, or when you see people like pull it off well. Um, Nero's also different in the sense of like he doesn't use other weapons like Dante. He will only use his one sword and his one gun and his demon arm. He'll figure out more moves. But I think the fact like he has this like play style, it fits him. And it makes him like very separate from Dante. Plus also because of that like demon arm, he can do WWE moves, which he does a lot more of in like future games, but it was introduced in this, and it's so cool the way he just pile drives enemy, and he has different animations for certain bosses or certain enemy types. So I think like Nero's inclusion is great. He's different, he's unique, and he's really fun to play, which is always like a worrying thing whenever you start a new franchise, or you're starting a new game in an existing franchise, and you're like, we're gonna make a completely new character who's not the guy everyone likes, but is kind of similar, and you run the risk of like, he's just gonna be not Dante, which is no, that version comes later, but I think I'm really for nothing else. I'll complain about the level design later, but at the very least, it does a good job with its at least opening story and with its new characters. But yeah, we talked about it a little bit, but like Robert, what is the problem with this game's design and why it's very hard to replay this game?
Um, so the issue is where when you get halfway through the game with Nero, he is incapacitated for a bit, and Dante takes over the spotlight. And instead of having Dante play his own levels, he goes through Nero's levels backwards. So you go through the city, you go to like this frozen like chapel, you go to a jungle, and then you go to like this tower-ish lab place. And Dante does all that in reverse. And the levels are pretty fun going forward. They play around with Nero's strengths pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
But Dante doesn't really interact with the levels as much. He just kind of runs back and fights demons meant for Nero. But he has to fight, so they don't always feel the best because Dante doesn't have the same moveset as Nero. Like, for example, some of the enemies that Nero fights kind of revolve around his Devil Bringer arm, where you can lock on and press right trigger or the B button and pull an enemy to you. Dante doesn't have that. So he kind of has to play a waiting game sometimes for certain enemies because he can't do the things that Nero can.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
going through the levels backwards too, the levels aren't super long, but they're not always the most interesting on their own. So it kind of becomes more of a slog because even like the story moments are pretty light because Dante pretty much lampshades, oh yeah, all right, we got to go back to like the first area. So the only real like story or cutscenes happen is when Dante plays cleanup on Nero's bosses, because something that it's hard to notice at first is Nero doesn't actually finish the boss fights he does. The boss fights end right before the meter like or their health runs out, and Dante has to go back and finish the fights that Nero didn't. And that's the only real story-ish moments, and it's more of just a way to justify Dante getting new weapons.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's a lot to unpack. Like I like they try to add in also like new little level gimmicks too when you're running back through. Like one of the most annoying ones is like the forest one where there's like these little plants open up and eat you on the ground unless you jump out of the way, and they're just constantly following you. And if they do catch you, they reset the level for you. Like not that you die instantly, it's just that you have to run all the way back through it all again. It's so annoying.
You have to backtrack on top of your backtracking.
Yeah.
It's so clear that it is just to pad out time, and it's like, oh god, like really, it's really unfortunate because I think like we talked about, the combat in DMC4 is pretty dang good. The biggest thing holding it back is just like the level design, which in of itself isn't bad until they start reusing it. It just feels lazy. Um, and just really boring. Like it's just not fun, which is a shame because getting the chance to play as Dante again should feel like an exciting moment. And at first, it kind of is, but whenever you're having to replay through the same levels again with some minor differences, and then having to fight against all the same bosses again, it's like, okay, this is not that fun.
Yeah, because Nero only really has one boss that's unique to him, and Dante barely has a boss that's unique to him.
Oh my gosh, that savior boss fight where like you're jumping between. Yeah. I hated that level. I still hate that.
Yeah, there's a particular boss fight at the very end of the game that's infamous for just how like boring it is.
Yeah.
It does more spectacle than like actual like depth to it, and the spectacle is at minimum.
It's a cool boss fight on paper. This giant stone like titan you're fighting, and it should be a cool thing, but it's just not, and it just doesn't feel impactful. Just doesn't.
It's the DMC2 problem of your guns are kind of going to do more than your sword.
And like this is actually interesting to bring this up because it brings me to nothing that's proven, but it's kind of a theory I've had about DMC4, where I think they wanted this game to have broader appeal to more action audiences, so they started taking a lot of ideas from other action genre games at the time. So I think that final boss fight is supposed to be an echo of like Shadow of the Colossus. So it's like, oh, it's a big enemy that you fight on, except they do it really boring, where it's like you just run around from different platforms and shoot at it and fire these cannons at it so you can get close and punch these gems on it. It's like, okay, that's kind of boring.
And I felt more Bayonetta from that fight, which is ironic because Bayonetta was original. Well, I shouldn't get into like the whole story of that. That's a long thing, but
also like Bayonetta came out after DMC4 too. So I wouldn't say it's that. I got
my years backwards. Never mind then. Okay.
Yeah, I would think it's more Shadow of the Colossus, which, granted, like, it wasn't the only game ripping it off. I remember tons of other games doing it too. Like, Castlevania Lords of Shadows also has a very similar boss fight where you fight a giant creature and you climb on it and you hit these giant gemstones on it. It's like, yeah, it became a pretty big trope after Shadow of the Colossus. The biggest inspiration, weirdly, I see is DMC4 feels a lot easier than the other Devil May Cries, and I think it's because they're taking a lot of cues weirdly from God of War. Nero is really cool stuff with him, but his moveset is really simple compared to Dante's, compared to like all the weapons and different movesets you have to learn. You only have to really learn your sword and your gun and your buster arm. And not Gears of War, sorry, God of War. God of War is really known for like its really gnarly executions and stuff like that. Like these big extended moves that like Kratos does to his enemies in the middle of a fight. And I think that's what Nero's Buster Arm was the equivalent of, was just like, okay, we just got to give a really cool, easy, like takedown move for Nero to make him look really cool and flashy. And I think that's what it was. I think that's taken a cue from God of War. And some of it works. Like I think Nero's Buster Arm is a little bit more forgivable because there's some cool timing things you can do with certain bosses in the game that's really cool with it. But it felt like that sometimes being an amalgamation of different ideas may have not been in the best interest of Devil May Cry 4.
Yeah, it was. I don't think it's. I see what you're getting at, and yeah, definitely.
It's not a ripoff. Just taking a bit too much inspiration from other things that it didn't really need to.
Which is interesting that it's doing that because DMC is like, especially 3 and a lot of the earlier games, and like, well, really 1 and 3. These games are like always credited as like they're what inspired a lot of other action games to like come forward, and a lot of other developers to do that. And so 4 is an interesting thing where it's like they're kind of backtracking. They're like, because people brought inspiration from their game, and then when they're moving forward, they're almost like copying a copy of themselves already.
Yeah, it's super weird.
It's a very weird dynamic. So yeah, 4. I want to like 4 more than I do, which is why I keep moving up and down on my list because it does have a lot of like really fun elements. This is also another thing, and again, this is a special edition, I'm aware, but like this is technically the first time you're able to actually play as Lady and Trish, and but again,
the first time is Lady, second time is Trish.
Yeah, Trish was playable at DMC too.
Oh, I forgot about because I forget 2 exist. You're right, yeah. All right, first time you can play as Lady and Trish in a good game. Am I good to saying that? Is anyone going to argue?
You could pseudo play as Lady if you plugged in a second controller during the credits of 3.
No one did that. y'all are just trying to mute my point.
There's
Anyway,
just layers here.
Anyway, yes, but they have fleshed out movesets, and it should be a real cool moment that it's like they have like their own like thing. But again, you're just playing through the same level, which you've essentially played through twice because you played through it forward and now you played through it backwards. And if you want to play as Lady and Trish, now you got to play through it forward and then you got to play through it backwards again. And that
you play it forward as Lady and then backward as Trish, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. Lady is all of because Lady's grappling hook is supplemented for Nero's Buster Arm, so that's how they get around that. And that doesn't even get me started if you play through the special edition as Virgil, because he just plays through all of the levels as himself. So that means Virgil, you have to go all the way to the end and then turn around and go all the way back playing through the levels you just did as the exact same character.
However, Virgil's just grossly broken, so that kind of makes it more fun.
Yeah, I'm about to say, this is a very fun version of Virgil, but
because Virgil is you're playing through the game as the boss character.
Yes, very much.
I will add.
Go ahead.
I do want to add that with like all the different playable characters though is a nice touch. I do like how they all play like a little bit differently. Like they all like like Lady is more gun focused and she has like different like charge moves with her weapons, and Trish also has like the little lightning trails and like throwing out the Sparta sword. Like she's able to switch between like fisticuffs to her sword ability. Like there's some really cool setups you could do with there, and obviously playing as Virgil. Special Edition did a great job of adding some variety of different characters to play as, and I definitely had certain favorites coming out of it. But to counter that, I do think there are things where it's just like, much like Nero himself, there's things that keep him from being quite on the level of like Dante in terms of depth in combat. Like I like Nero, I like his sword and gun and his Buster Arm, but I felt like in DMC4 he was missing something a little extra, and I feel like that way across the board with like also Trish and Lady. Like Trish is cool with her moves, but when you get down to it, a lot of her moves is her fisticuffs is a lot like whenever Dante would use his own fist type weapons. Like I don't remember what they're called. Gilgamesh,
right? Or Gilgamesh.
It's Gilgamesh. And then like also the Sparta sword functions pretty similar to just his rebellion sword as well. So it's kind of just they are different characters. It's just they're like still a little bit half baked. It's like, okay, they needed something a little bit more extra there to add to them. The only one that really holds up all that well is Virgil. And I mean, like, they basically used basically Virgil from DMC3 and added in the concentration system, and that was basically it. So it's a mixed bag, honestly.
Yeah. That's the thing. Every time I feel like I praise something about 4, there's always something else that's like, well, no, that's not actually as good. Like nothing quite sticks the way I want it to, because there are some. I think Robert kind of pointed out best when like he was talking about the development. It very much feels like this game is half finished. It's so close. Maybe even over half, but it just feels like, the level design, the 4 levels that are there, if it was just those 4, then like, no, those are 4 good, unique, distinct levels.
More like 10, isn't it? Like
It's 10 levels, but there's 4 like areas.
I'm gonna say, I say there's technically 10, but you know what I mean, like when you don't have to go through it backwards.
There's 4 set pieces, I
Yeah.
think.
I would say, yeah. I guess 4 areas is what I should say. Like those 4 areas are good, but the fact that I had to play through them forward and backwards makes it annoying. The fact that you have so many, especially a special edition, you have so many different characters to play as is good, but Dante is the only one that feels fully
Finished.
to me. Yeah, finished. I would still argue Nero, but maybe I think that's more just a
I
personal
don't.
thing.
I never got to get a chance to this. I definitely agree with Seth on the Nero kind of feeling a little half baked as well. His moveset just doesn't feel as deep as like Dante's. He doesn't have as many moves to like pull from, and he lacks that oomph like Seth was talking about that really makes him like feel completely fleshed out. Which foreshadowing 5 does that a lot better.
Yeah, which 5 does a lot of things better, but yeah, but you see what I'm saying? Like 4, it's so close, but everything is just like it's stopped one step before doing something great. Like every step it moves forward, it goes 2 steps backwards. So
Yeah.
that's why it's
I
weird.
Yeah, I would say it's still, I would say, like, I'd keep emphasizing that I still think DMC4 is still like a very good game. But I do agree that, like, in terms of like its quality, it is very repetitive, and unfortunately, I think it wears out its welcome really quickly
Yeah.
after those initial 10 levels. And like, it's a shame because like there really is like I could totally see 4 could have been like easily like one of the top games for me because of like, oh man, you got all these modes like legendary Dark Knight mode, which is very fun. I think that mode is just
Yeah.
absurdly stupid and fun.
Which for those who don't know, Legendary Dark Knight mode is essentially let's just fill the screen with as many enemies as the game can render, and sometimes even more than it can render, but it's fine.
It's so fun. I think it's like just it's so there's so many to put it this way, there's super costumes in all these games. They usually deduct enough points to where you'll never get an S rank on them. I think you can actually play through the Legendary Dark Knight mode, and because there's so many enemies there, that you could still get S ranks even with uh the super costumes, which is very funny to me. Like that's how many enemies there are that it negates the penalty.
It's just the same. Legendary Dark Knight mode is definitely a fun mode and definitely worth trying out. If you're okay with just playing through the same levels over and over again. But
And you know, I feel like Legendary Dark Knight mode also kind of reinforces my theory of the whole God of War comparison, where you're just like at that point you're not even comboing, you're just slashing in a mob.
yeah,
That's it.
You're just doing whichever moves are able to hit enough people.
Yeah, I think 4 is one of those games where it's like the people that really like 4 don't as much play the main game as they do the Bloody Palace. Because the Bloody Palace is, I think, where a lot of people say 4 shines the most.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the Bloody Palace is really fun. Like,
Yeah, which to kind of explain what the Bloody Palace is, it's like a gauntlet of different fights.
100
It's a
levels
mixture of like 100 levels of regular enemy fights and boss fights.
of varying difficulty.
A very difficulty. The difficulty gradually increases like every 20 floors, I think, or at least in 5 it's every 20. Um, and you're on a time limit, so you kind of have to be as efficient but also kind of stylish as possible because you gain additional time based on how well you play.
Yeah. It's a I think I would say 4 is like Blade Palace is definitely like a really fun mode to play, and it's probably where I spend like a large majority of my time. But before we move on to the next game, is there any other points that you guys had for 4? I know we were on this one for a while.
The time has come, and so have I.
Good song. Good song.
Great song. Fantastic song, by the way. Real lyric in the song, but
Yeah.
Yes.
That's not him making a joke. That is a real lyric.
There's a lot more sexual. I will say this much, like just a offhand thing, but like there's a lot more sexual innuendo in like Devil May Cry 4, like so much more. Like when
4 is a
when
very
Dante,
horny game.
yeah,
What are
like
you
when
talking
Dante
about?
gets the what is it called? Was it Lucifer, the thing that like implants spikes and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's
Like
just,
his
Yeah.
I can't remember the monologue off the top of my head, but he gives this like really long monologue. It's like, are you talking about killing demons or fucking? Like, I can't tell.
well, yeah, because Dante doesn't know what sex is.
Dante thinks sex is killing demons, but
uh,
no. You want to talk about a horny game? You want to talk about horny? Let me tell you about the next game, and we won't talk about this game for very long. I just wanted to bring.
oh, hold on,
Okay.
real quick. I do want to add one thing. I do actually like this. It's not as good as Devil May Cry 3, but I do like the story in Devil May Cry 4. Even Dante's inclusion feels good. Like if you just watch the cutscenes on this game, I think it's a fairly good story for the Devil May Cry universe. Spoilers, like it's pretty heavily implied that like Nero is Virgil's like how do you what's the term you use for it whenever the dad is like ran off for the milk and he's never come back?
I mean, that's still son. It's just abandoned
Yeah.
child. That's still son.
Yeah.
He's still
Yeah.
the son.
Yeah.
Virgil just
Yeah.
doesn't want to pay the child support.
Exactly. But I really did like Nero and his story and kind of like his relationship with like Dante in it. And like honestly, like kind of like you see him like grow as a character. And I think some of the best stuff is like the stuff with like Credo, like when Credo, spoiler, like when Credo is like Kyrdie's brother and also works with like the church as like a knight commander type dude. He gets betrayed and killed, and like it it really you actually see how like something like that, like a death of a character, weighs on Nero, like feeling like he wasn't powerful enough to take care of the people around him, which is a running theme in the Devil May Cry series. um I like Nero as a character. I think he grows a lot. I do think Kyrie is kind of sucks in this game, not because of her acting or anything. It's just she has very little to do other than basically be the princess in the castle in the game for Nero.
Yeah, she's essentially a MacGuffin. Like, let's be real. She's the MacGuffin of the
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, it's sad.
That's how it is. So you need to get him in the cast. But yeah, I agree. I think the story is one of the better parts of 4. But was that the last thing before I do my amazing transition?
I was also just one more thing. I do think, and this is not really something that they super touch on, but I do think it's a nice game to play after 3's story, just because it does feel like that it might, in my opinion, the way I see it, it does seem to give Dante maybe a little bit more hope about his family, because I think when he sees Nero now, he sees a lot of Virgil in him, and I think he's glad that like to Dante at this point, he still thinks that his brother's dead and gone. So to him, he probably thinks that like a part of his brother still lives on in Nero.
Yeah,
and I think that's a nice little thing.
Which I guess this is a good point to kind of bring up the theory I was talking about of like why Dante's character is it is. And essentially, the theory is that, and it's very simple. It's the theory that Dante loves his brother, which is it's a theory, but also like pretty universally accepted. And because if you look at the chronological like order of this, it's in 3 Dante's super joking and happy and whatever because he's fighting his brother, and his brother's still alive. He has no trauma. Well, I mean, his trauma of losing his parents, but every video game character has that, so he's okay with it. And so he's wacky, woohoo, fun. But then in 3, or excuse me, yeah, no, in 1 he comes back and then Virgil dies, quote unquote. He is sent to hell, and Dante believes that Virgil dies. So after 1, you get to 2. Dante is still grieving over the fact that his brother is dead, and he doesn't have his like rival anymore to like kind of mess around and play with. So he's sad and he's depressed, and that's why he's more serious and more tone focused in 2. And then when we get from 2 we go to 4, which is chronologically the correct order. He meets Nero, and at this point, he's a couple of years, so he's starting to get over. And also, the fact that Nero reminds him of Virgil. Nero uses Yamato to, when he's in his, like, devil mode. I'm not going to call it devil trigger yet. But
it's like JoJo mode.
Yeah,
he gets a stand.
He activates his stand, which uses Yamato, and which is a Virgil story. And so that reminds him of his brother. So that's the idea. The reason Dante is sometimes joking and sometimes not is because he loves his brother, and when his brother's not around, he's sad and gets serious and not as joking. So that is the kind of.
I think it's pretty clear that he does care about Virgil quite a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, they are family at the end of the day. They just have vastly different like goals and ideals. So Virgil kind of gets like obsessed and consumed by his desire for more power,
which also comes from a place of trauma, like
Yeah.
as like
yeah.
for like I mean, obviously, like this gets really in the weeds of like Devil May Cry's lore, but essentially, like I think Virgil kind of blames himself for the death of his parents or rather his mom to a degree, because he felt like he wasn't powerful enough to save her. So that's why he craves it, is because he doesn't ever want to feel like he's in a vulnerable spot ever again. Once again, this is more just kind of theories, not things explicitly stated by the game. But I think to a degree, some of these thoughts are kind of safe to think of. Like, yes, they I think the brothers do love each other to a degree.
After they killed each other, and of course the Pope as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's all. That's kind of like the reason why like his attitude changed, and it does add a little bit of like more depth to these characters, which I've always enjoyed. But forget about all that depth, because now we are talking about arguably, it's not my least favorite because 2 exists, but a game I very much don't like, which is DMC Devil May Cry, which, yes, I said that correctly. DMC, which stands for Devil May Cry, also is the subtitle, which is Devil May Cry, and I hate that. I'm talking about the reboot. They rebooted this game to be more edgier and more focused on a younger audience. It had a much
different developer too.
Completely different
developer.
developer.
Ninja Theory worked on it.
Yeah, Ninja Theory, almost a new world. The only similarities really is the fact that they have the same backstory and their names are Dante and Virgil. But it's also like set in, because the Devil May Cry, they're kind of set in this modern world, but like this one focuses more on like television, hackers, all this other stuff, while still being about demons. And I really don't like this game. I really don't like this reboot. The characters are just so different. I don't like. A lot of people call him Dante because he's just
Dante.
Yeah, because he's weird version of Dante. Lady and Trish are gone. It's replaced by this other girl named Kat. Virgil is there, and they work together with Dante, but of course, because he's Virgil, he betrays Dante at the end.
Yeah.
Which it's
Virgil's like the head of like this secret society.
Yeah. Which another thing, Virgil has no reason to betray his brother. He's like a good person and like a good dude, and like, yeah, I want to take down Mundus, who's like this, who instead of, I mean, he is the Demon King, but also in charge of like this corporation. At the very end of the game, after defeating Mundus, he's like, yeah, and I also want to rule the world. And Dante's like, what? When did this come about? You've not mentioned this for the remainder of time I've known you. The fact that you all of a sudden want to be like, yeah, I want to take over. I want to take over as the Demon King. You've always been about, no, I want to take him down. And it's like, it felt like just tacked on because it's Virgil, so he has to be a villain at the end, or he has to.
Yeah, I do want to add this much about like Virgil. I don't know how much he is like necessarily a good guy, considering one of his acts is he does like use a sniper rifle to do a demon abortion on a demon lady.
I forgot about that part. Oh my god, yeah, that was weird.
Yeah,
I didn't even get that far.
I forgot about that part. I think I blocked that out of my memory.
Yeah, that's a weird, and I think that just, but I think that more than anything, that just adds the argument. Like, yeah, there's like a lot of just really weird, edgy elements to like Devil May Cry, or sorry, DMC, that like That's weird. That's just like this doesn't really have a place in Devil May
Yeah.
Cry. It's weird. I will say that actually, you go ahead and face your thoughts, and then I'll throw in some stuff on it.
Yeah, so it's just it's very stylistic, and I don't. Okay, I'm on a lot of the negatives. I'll talk about what I do like. Some of the boss fights are fun, and I actually like the gameplay. I like the fact that the weapons are angel and demon based, and you have different variety. Like he essentially has Nero's like pull and like devil bringer, but now he controls, do I go to the enemy or does the enemy go to me? It also leads to the only time in the DMC series where I actually enjoy the platforming is this game. This is the only time where I actually enjoyed the platforming. Every other Devil May Cry, I don't think the platforming is that good. It's one of the negatives about the series. And
Kind of designed a little more of the platforming in mind.
yeah, and so the platforming's good. The gameplay actually feels fun. And the boss fights are actually kind of interesting. They're unique and different enough from each other that I can remember them. But outside of that, this game, in my opinion, has the worst soundtrack of all the DMCs. I hate the character design of everyone. Dante looks like kind of just generic. He looks like me, and I look like every generic white boy with brown hair, except his hair is black technically. But he looks just generic and not very interesting. Virgil is slightly better, but not really that much. He's just generic white boy, except now he has white hair.
I think he was a fedora in one scene, which is not a good sign.
Oh yeah, that's how he's introduced.
He does wear a
He
fedora.
introduced with a fedora, and I'm just like, you look like a jackass. And he's just.
He looks like a redditor.
He looks like yes, he looks like a redditor who's like a Discord mod for some e-girl that is not gonna like she has no interest in him. And it's just also one of his like interests is hacking for some reason, and he just brings that up all the time, just like how Dante, instead of being jokey and fun and silly, always brings up the fact that he just loves having sex. That's new Dante's character is he is so horny. You want to talk about the horniest DMC? It was this one, because the opening scene he's bagging some devil like girl with like a little devil outfit, but also bagging a girl with a little angel outfit. And then like the opening fight scene, he's naked, but a piece of pizza is blocking his penis. And everything in horror movies represents a penis and all this. And I'm pretty sure there's one line like where he is comparing dick sizes with Virgil. I don't remember.
No, Virgil has a line that's like, "My dick is bigger."
That's what it is. Yes. No. Yeah. Where Virgil becomes horny. I'm like, what the heck? So there's a lot of things that frustrate me about this game. If it wasn't obvious, I think I'm about to like change my ranking. I'm about to put it below 2, but I don't think I will because the gameplay and the are still good. So that's my rant about the DMC reboot. I don't.
Yeah.
Like it, so
I think, and I think taking what you're saying there. I've only played a little bit of it, and I just wasn't interested in it. But that was also during a time whenever I wasn't really into Devil May Cry, and I think that my attitude might change a little bit when I decide to replay it. The prevailing thought I seem to have is it does have like good combat, and it does seem to have some pretty interesting boss and enemy designs. I think one of the things that kind of hold this back is it's called Devil May Cry when it's kind of not. It's not really Devil May Cry. Because like as you mentioned, like Virgil and Dante are only Virgil and Dante in name only. Like it's bizarre. I have seen some reactions online, and I do think that there are some like defenders of this game, which is great. That's a good sign. And I think it's because people like the combat and the attitude of it. And I think the music in this game was a little bit more screamo.
It is.
Yeah. But I overall like I think like there is some like redeemable qualities about DMC if it wasn't called DMC, you know?
yeah.
And I also think and just one little extra thing. apparently in like the DMC Special Edition, they added in a new mode to the series called Dante Must Style, which is actually a really cool mode where essentially you'll only do damage to enemies when you're at an S rank, so it forces you to style up your combos, which is really cool. And I kind of wish that there was like a mode like that in like future DMC games.
Yeah, it does have. I was like gameplay wise, and that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good idea, and like it really fits the theme of Devil May Cry. Like you want to be stylish, you want to be fancy and flashy. So yeah, I like that mode, but yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the coffin of if this wasn't called DMC, we wouldn't be talking about it. It would have been a fun game, and it would have been like an okay. I mean, I think the story is still kind of stupid, especially with the whole demon abortion, which I don't really want to talk about. I've got to block that out of my memory, but now I can't stop thinking about that stupid scene. But yeah, a lot of its issues is the fact that like when you compare it to the rest of the series, it just doesn't fit, and it's just so weird. The fact that like they thought that this was still the same like series as the rest of them. So, Robert, I've kind of ranted a while, so I've ran out of stuff. What are your thoughts on a reboot? And we don't have to stay on it for long.
Yeah, I didn't play much of the reboot. I never touched it through my initial replay, and I was trying to see if I would have time to play through it before the podcast, but because I was starting a new job, I didn't really have the time to do the reboot, so I just kind of sampled a couple levels. Um, my kind of thoughts so far that the story and characters I don't really like. It just doesn't feel Devil May Cry. But the gameplay I thought was pretty solid. It's got kind of the core stuff that like 3 and 4 kind of does, but they introduced like an angel and demon weapon type thing where like you hold triggers and you can switch different weapons for different types of enemies and like light puzzle solving and traversal stuff. I think that's pretty neat. But it's a fun game with some unique ideas of how they do upgrades and stuff. But the story and the characters and the music, I can't really get behind.
Yeah. So that is DMC. DMC, still the stupidest named. One of the stupidest named games I've ever seen. I think that's probably what frustrates me the most about anything. Is the fact that it's Devil May Cry, Devil May Cry. But anyway, that said, and I will apologize for my commentary on the next game because my commentary will be pretty much blank is so sick, and I'll be talking about almost everything because this is the game that got all of us into these series, and really the game that is the reason we're doing this. This is one of my favorite games I've ever played, just period. Not just action. This is one of my favorite games ever, and it's Devil May Cry 5. Every single thing that we've talked about, at least in my opinion, DMC 5 does good or it does better than everything else. The soundtrack is amazing. We have sung Virgil's soundtrack to each other or just made memes about it constantly. The gameplay is insane. Dante literally has every style you would want, except for Doppelganger and
Quicksilver.
Quicksilver. Thank you. And he has every single weapon plus new ones, and his old Double Trigger plus a completely new form, and all these other different amazing things that like essentially he can play all the other DMCs in this one mode, in this one game. Nero is completely like he's not completely, but he's revamped, so he is so different because now his Devil Bringers are robot arms that he can replace, so that adds a lot more variety to his gameplay. He can switch out the different arms he's using for different effects, which adds variety. Then in a completely new character named V. I know not everyone's the biggest fan of V because he's more of a puppet character. But god dang it, I freaking love playing as V. I don't know, something about him. I don't even like puppet characters that much normally, but for some reason he is so sick. I love the fact that you're playing as old bosses essentially, and you're controlling them while you're just reading poetry he's edgy, but he's like edgy in like a really fun way. And I think he contrasts with like everyone else. I don't. It's a rarity if he'll actually come back because of how the story proceeds, but I hope he does because I found him really fun and really entertaining. And then of course one of this is they're back to the center point of spoiler for DMC5. Virgil is the main boss, and it's confirmed that Nero is Virgil's son. It was implied, but now they just completely confirm it. And I think that ending is so sick. The rematch between Dante and Virgil up in that like open arena is one of the most sick fights like in the entire series, and the fact that it's followed within Nero versus Virgil, and Nero unlocks his double trigger in that moment. It is one of the coolest moments in video games. That boss fight I have replayed a million times. I'm pretty sure Seth has replayed it countless more than me.
Eh,
And and I love everything about this game. Every time I start talking about it, I do what I'm doing now, and I just gush, and I just keep going, and I just keep singing its praises. So I'm gonna stop myself and just kind of say like that's why I love this game. And now I'm gonna throw it to Seth. Your turn.
uh, so yeah, Devil May Cry 5 is definitely like easily my favorite out of all these. That's really shouldn't be any surprise. I This is the first game ever that I was like, I'm gonna chase all the S ranks, and not just like, oh, every level. I'm talking about every level on every difficulty. It's friggin' insane, and I played through it countless times. And I have to say, is this game is like basically taking everything that Devil May Cry had learned up to Devil May Cry 4. I'm not really going to count DMC because I really don't see much of DMC's impact in DMC 5.
Yeah.
But it taken every lesson that they learned and honing it down to pitch perfect quality. Like the combat is flawless. The level design is so much better paced. There's no real like big long puzzle sections or backtracking or anything. They even decided to like add in like different routes of how you can progress through levels in certain areas. Just boss fights are for the most part pretty dang good. You play as only like 3 characters, 4 if you have special edition, but they're all like fully fleshed out and they feel very good in their own way. And like you mentioned earlier, Nero with his different Buster arms. The best way I could put it is like not only do the Buster arms have like different things, like some of them are more focused on dodging and traversal, while others are more focused on like damage and juggling enemies in the air. And then whenever you charge them up and like you break them, but they have you basically Nero has like over 10 different kinds of ultimates, is the best way I could describe it. Um, this game is awesome. It has countless replayability just because of how good the characters are, how good the level design is. The difficulties just add to it, and you get Virgil on top of this in special edition, along with legendary Dark Knight mode and Turbo mode. It's it's so much content, like it's insane. I love this game, and I also really like its story. Does it quite reach the heights of maybe DMC3? I would argue maybe not, but I think it tells a really good story with what it has, while never letting the story get in the way of the really awesome gameplay. Not to mention the music changes based on how well you're doing in combat, so
Yeah.
that's a plus.
All right, Robert, your turn.
The game feels like liquid cocaine once you get into the groove of things.
Yeah.
Everything feels so smooth, so satisfying. Everything has just fantastic impact. The level design, like Seth mentioned, it takes a lot of like the puzzle solving exploration out, and you pretty much go point A to B, just getting in different fights, different types of scenarios. Most of the enemies are just really fun to just combo style on. There's only one enemy type that I really have an issue with. Drawing a blank on the name, but it's like the ones that kind of are hard to kill unless like they're dashing at you.
Furies, yeah.
Furies, yeah, yeah, yeah. Those are like the only enemies I don't like fighting. Everything else feels great. Most of the boss fights just feel fantastic. The dynamic music adding on to just making it to where you're rewarded through the song being better by playing better, which is something that doesn't really happen in a lot of games. I I don't really have anything new to say that Seth hasn't already really said in that
Yeah.
department. It was definitely the first Devil May Cry game I went out of my way to get the platinum trophy on. I got the special edition with my PS5 after playing the normal version on PC and Xbox. I bought this game 3 times.
Yeah.
And I beat it
Yep.
on multiple platforms, got the platinum on PlayStation, and I still want to just go back and play it again. Like, there's so much replay value that even just starting a whole new run is still fun. Like, outside of that first playthrough of Nero before you can unlock, like, his full move set, um, once you get past that, it's, like, Nero becomes, like, probably my favorite character to play as really depends on the day. Some days it's Nero, some days it's Dante, some days it's Virgil. It really just depends how I'm feeling,
What about V?
but,
Come on. I think I'm the only one that's like, I love V. I don't even,
I
okay,
like
okay,
V.
these
I wouldn't say
these
I love it, but I like him.
V's a pretty okay character. I wouldn't say I still have fun playing as V.
Yeah.
I think he's definitely the weakest because he's like a puppeteer type character. So you're kind of less in the action and like directing others to do things. So it's not always the most like intuitive just for how my brain works. But he's still like a fun character. You can still get pretty creative with like juggling enemies and
Yeah.
taking down bosses and such. Um, but most of my time I'm either playing as like Nero or Virgil because they're my favorites to play as.
No, of course.
Uh,
The one
yeah,
the one thing that I think this game misses, and it's literally the one complaint, and it's not even a complaint, it's just the fact that they didn't add it, is I think because of how different there are 4 playable characters and how different all 4 of them play together, this was the perfect game for them to introduce co-op. Even if just like Bloody Palace or even just a few missions. Because they even have this weird kind of like not co-op, like as you're playing through the levels, you can see across and like, if you're playing as Nero, a V is playing through the same level. And it might even be Seth, just out of random coincidence. Or you can set that up. But we can't really, other than I think one part, we can't really interact or we can't do like mini levels together. And that's the one thing where I'm like, I wish they would just pull the trigger and just be like, Blade Palace can be, even if you just add more enemies, or maybe just like add like a quick run through of just legendary Dark Knight mode, but you can play as, but there could be 2 characters on there. I think it would be so much
yeah,
fun to like just have a partner do that, but I don't know if I can even
yeah.
really knock a game for not adding a feature I had in my mind. Because they do everything so perfectly. Everything just feels really good in Devil May Cry. Dante's moveset is the most complicated moveset I've ever seen on a character. So much so that I pray for whoever, like, if they ever make another Marvel vs. Capcom and someone's asked to put this version of Dante in it, I think I would just quit. Because it's so extensive and he has so many different, modes and mechanics and different things that like
If if
it's
you want to see
overwhelming.
Dante's like potential like stretch to its limits, go on YouTube and look up SSS Smoke. That guy does like these insane Dante combos that just seem to go on forever. And like, how does this man like still have fingers after these videos?
I'm pretty sure like
I'm gonna I'm gonna counter that real quick and say also like he's really good. Even better in my opinion is Dongiri 900, Donguiri. That dude is insane. No joke, how he plays Dante is sometimes is he used Trickster and he plays him like Goku. He is instant transmissioning all over the dang place. It is insane.
the fact that this is a single player game and that there are specific YouTubers that like playing it almost like it's a fighting, like this is one of the few single player games where I'm like, yeah, no, and there is a lab and it's a good lab, but no, I need a lab to go in and like practice combos because there's just so much, and you have so much freedom between everything, and it's this game is so much fun. I feel like the more I talk about it, the more it's just gonna be. And Blank is so sick, and I just love it. So I'm trying to think about. I like the new character. There's not many new characters in this, but I like the inclusion of Nico, who is like Nero's like essentially handler. Which, yes, pun intended. The fact that a lot of what she's giving him is robot arms. I like the
I like it. I like to refer to her as Redneck Q.
yeah, that's a good way of doing it. With the most overpowered character in all of DMC, that freaking van.
I love that.
The way she summons that van from the earth or just drives it out of nowhere is so funny every single time. I love the bird Griffin. I know he's technically from 1, but he actually has a character in this. He's so funny. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, every other character has already been existing, but they're just done better.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just whenever DMC 6 come out, just do DMC 5 again, and just keep because DMC is best when it does this like more family focused story.
Does DMC kind of random? Does DMC 4's Virgil have like you can use Doppelganger and his double trigger form at the same time?
I don't.
That's a good question. I don't think
yes,
so, but I could very much.
But I could be
because that's like a. That's like a thing you could do with Virgil in 5 is you can summon Doppelganger, you can go into double trigger yourself, and you can set a delay to Doppelganger. So you could have it do its moves like at the same time, slightly faster, like after you, for like all these different weird combos. Like there's so much crap you can do
I'm pretty sure
in this game.
I'm pretty sure yes you can. I think you can do that, but it's just not as intuitive. I don't know if like I remember doing something. I remember messing with the speed of the doppelganger in 4, but what I definitely don't remember doing is the fact that Virgil can spam supers. Like it's a freaking
Yes.
like it's just
Yeah, if you go into Sin Devil Trigger, you could do like 3 supers in a row.
Yes.
Oh
and
yeah.
When you build up the momentum thing, you can finish that all supers and then do the
You can
was it Art of V or something
Art of V.
Yeah, and then you turn because of spoilers. V, if you didn't figure it out, is Virgil. He's just Virgil without all of his demonic powers. So he gets him back to get back to true Virgil form. But Virgil still has a super where he turns back into V for a little bit and summons all of his like demon friends. And it's so sick. Sorry again.
Virgil hires Dante to go kill Virgil so Virgil can reunite with Virgil.
Yeah. But don't forget the fact that Dante enlists the help of Virgil's son to help kill Virgil so that Virgil can reunite it. But don't worry, Virgil's son stops Virgil. It's not confusing at all. Don't worry about it.
I said Virgil enough.
Yes, we've said Virgil enough to meet the quota. Okay. I think I've said everything that I could praise about, and if I didn't, it just assume the opposite of 2 with 5. If I didn't bring something up in 5, just assume that I love it. Seth, is there anything else with 5 that we didn't touch on?
I mean, I think we've like touched on a bit of everything. I tell you what though, it was whenever the special edition came out and I had like a new rigid system to play it finally. It kind of blew everything out of the water. I was definitely like all over that game again. I do want to reiterate, just to reinforce how much stupid amount of time I put into this game. I did all the S ranks and stuff like that in the Bloody Palaces. I also bought the Virgil DLC on the older gen consoles at the time. 100% did everything and S ranked everything with Virgil, and then I did all that crap again on Special Edition. I have an unhealthy relationship with this game. I need to see a doctor.
Yeah.
It's so good. I definitely think that like this is the game that basically really turned me on to the character action genre. So, and nothing has quite beaten it since then. This is the game that I really hold to the standard of quality of all other character action games.
So Devil May Cry is important in the fact that it basically defined a genre. Yeah, it had a few missteps on the way, but after three basically set the standard that every other character action game is pretty much being held to.
Yup,
And
pretty much. It's crazy.
So without Devil May Cry 3, I don't think we would have anything crazy like our Bayonettas or Metal Gear Risings, stuff like that.
and 5 just took all those elements and then just almost perfected them. But now that we've kind of started to backtrack, before we finish off, I do want to just get I think it's, at least for the most part, a lot of us are pretty obvious with our rankings, but I do want to just clarify what everyone's ranking from best to worst is. Um, and we'll probably have the same, but Seth, you can go ahead. What is, from best to worst in your, or you can do from worst to best, whichever you prefer.
I'll start with worst to best, although what's going to be at the top is pretty obvious.
Yeah, we all
I'm definitely DMC2 at the bottom, just because like that game was just a rush order. There really isn't anything redeemable about it. And then DMC reboot, just because like I have, once again, I should clarify, I have played neither of these two bottom games, but I will say based on what I've seen, at least DMC has some redeemable qualities. At least it has fun combat, whereas DMC2 does not. So those games are washes. They're whatever. Third place, I would put the first DMC game. I really like that game. I think it has a special charm to it, but it does have age, and there is a certain amount of like clunkiness with its stuff where they're still figuring things out.
Yeah.
DMC3, despite its issues, has my favorite story, so it's definitely like right above DMC1. Actually, sorry, let me reverse that. After DMC is Devil May Cry 4. You know, good combat, bit too repetitive. DMC3 above Devil May Cry 4 just because I really like the story. I think it's the best one out of the series, and the gameplay with like Dante and Virgil is very good. And then DMC5,
Yeah.
that's my top one.
I'm not even gonna do my list because my list is exactly the same. Like two is the worst, and then 5 has a few redeeming qualities. Then after 5 it goes DMC1. It's good, but not fleshed out entirely just because it was the first one. Then goes to DMC4, had some development issues, 3, and then 5. And I feel like that's a pretty universal, like, that's not a hot take. I completely agree with your list. I think that's good. Robert, is that what your list looks like, or are there any deviations?
I think I deviated a bit, so I'm gonna go from favorite to least favorite just because that's how I wrote it down.
Okay.
So DMC5, yeah, best gameplay overall, just the most fun for me to play. I could replay it any day of the week. DMC3 in second place. Like I said, it's my favorite narrative. It's got one of my favorite soundtracks. I think overall I like 3's soundtrack more than 5, but I really like 5's vocal tracks and like the battle themes. That's kind of what I like the most out of 3.
Yeah.
It kind of gets held back by level design and some bosses by the end of the game. And then in third place, I have Devil May Cry 1,
Okay.
which I think is a kind of interesting take. But basically, I had more fun playing 1 than I did on the replay of 4. So I kind of found the beauty and the simplicity of 1. I think it has a lot of like good ideas and a lot of charm to it, from like how they designed it, kind of making it its own thing out of Resident Evil. Um, yeah, I think it's a game I had increasingly more appreciation for, so that's kind of why I placed it in like the middle ground. Um, then I have DMC4 in fourth place, which I would not think this if I didn't do the series replay. Because while I think 4 is a good game in a lot of aspects and does feel better to play than 1 in some, what kind of holds me back is that definitely the rush job that kind of makes the second half of the game less fun. A lot of the enemies aren't really designed around Dante's kit in the main game, so it kind of makes it a little more of a chore. And the story didn't really grip me as much as the other ones, so I just kind of like checked out at a lot of points. I thought it was just going a little too much in the story department, and I just couldn't really be cared to follow a lot of it that wasn't around like Nero or Dante. Like anything of like the order, I just kind of didn't care about.
Yeah.
Um, I said it bored me. I had to take breaks from playing 4 again just because I just didn't want to keep playing, especially in the second half. And I think that's a pretty telling sign for me is if I don't really want to continue it much. And I kind of have to make myself continue. It's probably not going to be up there for me. And then last 2.
Honest,
What you gonna say?
Yeah.
no, nothing. I'll save it for when you finish.
I mean,
And yeah,
last.
then yeah, and last I have DMC 2 for everything I said earlier. I'm not really ranking DMC Devil May Cry just because I haven't finished that one. But if I had to rank it somewhere, it's hovering around 2, probably a little above 2, but that's not really a shocking revelation.
Pretty much where I'll put it. So where are you gonna say something?
So what I was gonna say is honestly, Robert's list is, depending on the day, I could easily see my list looking exactly like Robert's as well, to be fair.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. It's not.
Yeah.
I don't think it's
Yeah.
a hot take to switch around 4 and 1. I just think because
Yeah, that's kind of hell. And I would say even 3 to a degree, because there were just some things about 3 that just really annoyed me. So those 3 honestly can switch out a lot with me. I think there's good strengths and qualities in all 3 of them. Like that's kind of the cool thing, at least about those 3 games, is they all have varying different strengths and
Yeah,
weaknesses.
because that's kind of what I want to preface of my list. I don't think DMC 4 is a bad game. I just personally had a little more fun with 1 at the end of the day, but 4 is still a good game. And the barrier between like the good game and the bad game is pretty substantial.
yeah. Now, I say again, I think the only like quote unquote bad games in this series that like we had problems with were 2 and the reboot. So other than that, all these other games are definitely enjoyable. It's just kind of pretty obvious which ones are
And just
more.
And just to reiterate, with like DMC Reboot, it may have been a fine enough action game on its own, but it's a fine action game, but a bad DMC game is what I'm gathering.
Yeah. Well, I think that is everything that we can say about the Devil May Cry series. We have been talking about for a while. This is probably going to be one of the longer podcast episodes, but as always, we always finish it off with our fresh picks of the week. Robert, would you like to start us off with yours?
So I would like to plug another Capcom game. We kind of talked about a little bit is with the Resident Evil series. I finally gave the Resident Evil games more of a chance and played through them, and I want to plug the Resident Evil 2 remake. I am not a big fan of horror, but I really found myself enjoying a lot of things about 2. A lot of like its development and all the little like details in the 2 remake really just made me appreciate it a lot. It felt like a video game, and like the gameplay definitely came first than the story. The story was a little cheesy, a little goofy, but it was still enjoyable. The gameplay definitely took the precedence. To where like the puzzle solving was cool, the exploration was cool, the combat felt cool, and like the kind of strategy that goes into like dealing with like the zombies as opposed to like a normal like zombie game where you kill all of them. In the Resident Evil 2 remake, you kind of pick and choose which enemies you want to take down for good or some you just want to kind of stun and like slip past. I think it was just really well done. The tension when Mr. X is going after you is like it's fun. It's terrifying, but it's pretty fun to kind of have to, plan your route around him as well at certain points. And like when I did like my B playthrough with Claire, like redoing it because I ran into Mr. X too early and kind of making an optimal route for me to not deal with him was kind of neat. Like you can get the freedom to explore kind of your own way while still hitting like the main points you have to progress. Like it's neat what kind of strategies you can employ. And it's a very replayable game too. It only takes with skipping the cutscenes, it's only about a 2-3 hour game. And yeah, it's if you really like the Devil May Cry games, especially like the older ones that are more closer to Resident Evil, definitely try Resident Evil out. And 2 Remake definitely gets my seal of approval.
Okay. So are you recommending the whole series or just 2 remake or is all of them?
2 Remake is the one in particular.
Okay.
Also Resident Evil 4 I also recommend, but my pick is 2.
So they will be. They've already announced a remake to 4 as well, so keep an eye out for that.
Yes, I am definitely going to pick that up and watch.
I'll just go ahead and say this. So Drew's too much of a coward to actually play through any of the Resident Evil games. So me and Robert
Okay,
will take over the.
listen. I want to defend myself. I know the story and I know the gameplay of all of them because I just watch playthroughs.
All you do is just watch the playthrough. Me and Robert will play Resident Evil 4 remake, and we'll make a podcast for you, and it'll be great.
I know how to solve all the puzzles because I've watched how they're solved. I know all the moments. I know the story.
That is not what makes it fun. You don't understand.
I
You
know
need
the
to play
clunky
it.
tank controls. I'm just as knowledgeable. I get the reference.
He's scared.
I know all the references on this. Do your fresh pick. This podcast's already too long.
Alrighty. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna make it a little bit longer because I actually have like a couple here. I'll make one quick and one a little bit longer. So my first one is going to be Blair Witch Project. I watched that for the first time ever over Halloween. It's very good. I can see where some people might find it boring just because it's found footage and it's not the most terribly exciting horror film out there. But I thought it was really cool. I really like the format of it. And I'll just say, watch Blair Witch Project. Probably skip Blair Witch 2016. It's not as good. And then my other fresh pick is a game. It's called The Golden City. This is one I think Drew might actually really like. So basically, The Golden City is a time travel story where you find a lost city, travel back to when it existed during the Roman era, where it's been occupied by a bunch of Roman citizens.
This is the Forgotten City.
Oh, sorry, the Forgotten City. There's a big running theme of gold. Sorry, it's called the Forgotten City. You basically find it's a time travel story where you find a city populated by a group of Roman citizens, and essentially the rule of the city is called the Golden Rule, where basically if someone commits a sin, all these golden statues come to life and kill everyone. Your job is basically trying to figure out how to break the cycle, and your character, because they're a time traveler, can loop the same day over and over. So you are using knowledge that you learn about what happens to all these other citizens to basically prevent this from happening and breaking the loop. What makes it really good is not only is the story really good and actually has really good characters, it also has it's non-linear. So your investigation can go in very different areas and figuring things out. One of the greatest moments I had is how much freedom this game gives you is insane, because there's a part where I'm like, wait, if I do this, if I kill a certain character, I can create a time paradox, but will the game let me do this? So I did it. I killed one of the characters just because I'm like, this would create a time paradox, wouldn't it? And the game gave me an ending based on that. It was the bad ending, but it gave me one. And I was like, oh my God, that's awesome. The reason why I think Drew might be into it is this is a game that is very much rooted in, without giving too many spoilers, it is rooted in a lot about different mythologies of different cultures. So if you know a little bit about your Roman, Greek, and some other mythologies out there, I think you're going to find a lot of really good narrative payoff in this game without giving away what's going on.
Definitely. As you were talking about it, I'm also like looking up stuff on it. Yeah, I think you might have found a game I would probably like it. I am interested in it, so where can
Yeah.
people check this game out, Seth?
The only sad thing is it was on Game Pass. It was removed on Halloween. So I'm sorry.
Damn.
You might have to buy it.
Damn, no. Game Pass. You always sing your praises every single podcast. This is the one time you failed us. Oh well. I'm sure it's not. I'm sure I'll be fine. But
Yeah, I'm sorry.
definitely looks interesting. Okay. Is that all of them? You sure you don't want, or do you have another
Yeah, that's
one?
it.
Okay. All right. Well, my fresh pick is a show, and it's probably a very obvious pick to a lot of people, but I wanted to talk about it because we weren't doing a podcast episode about it, and that is Tales of the Jedi. Yeah, it's no surprise that I freaking love this show. I am a huge Clone Wars fan. We have done a bunch of Star Wars episodes, and so a lot of us are, except Seth, because Seth is too much of a coward to watch the Clone Wars. Yeah, I didn't think I'd bring it back on you. Ha!
How dare you make fun of your old elders? Listen, I'm an old man. I have a bad back. I don't know
You are
anything
only
anymore.
a
I
few
forget.
years older than me. You are that much older than me.
This
And me and
is
you,
elder abuse. He is like making fun of like my memory problems and my hearing. Like it's no good. Like
I'm
God,
sorry, old
like,
man. I don't want to play your stupid tank control horror game, alright? I'm gonna watch my 3D animated Star Wars show. Anyway, Tales of the Jedi is a great show, and if you are a fan of the Clone Wars, then you have already watched the show and know that it's amazing. It dives into the backgrounds of Ahsoka and Count Dooku. Really interesting story, really interesting character moments. This is a great time to be a Star Wars fan. With this show, that all the episodes released at once, plus Andor, which is another great show, is coming out at the same time. We did a podcast on the first 3 episodes of that, and the show has just kept going strong and kept doing better and better each episode. But my fresh pick is definitely Tales of the Jedi. Highly recommend it. Go watch it. And Seth's a fake Star Wars fan.
yeah, to making fun of the elderly. That's no good.
Yeah, exactly. The future is now, old man. And what also is right now is the end of the podcast. So I want to thank both of you again for joining me and talking. I know it's late for you, Seth, so you probably need to go to bed.
Yeah,
You're old. You're old.
I know.
I
need to take my melatonin.
Yeah. someone roll his wheelchair. That's gonna be the running gag. Seth is an elderly man.
I am ancient.
He's the old man. I'm the one that has to get up at 7 for work.
Yeah, so thank you all for watching. Appreciate your time. And again, thank you for the support on the latest YouTube video. Stay safe out there. Goodbye.
Take it easy.